Chapter 611, Fate Counselor Oravi was situated northeast of the Rorstad archipelago. The straight-line distance wasn't too great, but the safe sea route had required ships to take many twists and turns, causing the distance traveled to increase by several hundred nautical miles. It was originally a primitive island that harbored many kinds of beyonder creatures without any humans inhabiting it. After the hunting era came to an end, the Lone Kingdom banished certain criminals there, causing Oravi Island to gradually have villagers and towns. When more eastern islands were discovered and colonized, the area attracted many new immigrants due to the convenience of the sea route and its rich natural resources, making it a rather thriving port city. The light from the lighthouse tower appeared so warm in the dark environment as it led liners towards the harbor for them to dock. "We've finally arrived. My gratitude to the Crimson Moon and Fate for blessing me." Darkwill jumped off the last gangway and stepped onto solid cemented ground. "To be precise, apart from fate, you should thank the Fool and Sea God for their blessings." Klein held his leather suitcase with one hand as he tapped his cane. Darkwill properly put away the ring box which contained the die of probability, and he didn't delay in asking where the bellman, Carnot, stayed. He rented a carriage and went straight for St. Draco Cathedral. He then entered the magnificent bell tower which boldly used the colors of red, blue, and yellow. Inside the bell tower, Carnot had a cramped room he could call his own. Knock. 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 Darkwill knocked on the door thrice, eager to hand over the item on his person. With a creak, the brown wooden door opened and out came a large man who was slightly hunched. He looked to be in his 40s, and individually, there was nothing strange about his facial features, but when put together, it was filled with an unharmonious vibe. Klein only took a glance and discovered that his eyes weren't leveled. His nostrils were of different sizes, and his left facial muscles were slightly loose, causing the corner of his mouth to droop slightly. It was the complete opposite for the right side of his face. Carnot's legs were obviously of different lengths, and one of his arms was thick, while the other was thin. His entire body was highly disproportional, making him extremely ugly. "Who are you?" Dressed in a black robe, Carnot glanced at the duo. "Are you the bellman, Carnot?" Darkwill asked cautiously. Carnot chuckled with one corner of his mouth raised while the other stayed low. "There shouldn't be a second person as ugly as me." "Indeed." Darkwill nodded very honestly before laughing. "I can tell that you have quite a good state of mind. To be honest, looks don't matter for a man. What's important is their skills in bed." "Tisk, that's because you haven't seen ladies who only have fetishes for good looks." Having experienced the era of celebrities of the masses, Klein scoffed from the side. Carnot's expression darkened as he said, "I don't wish to discuss such matters." "You have problems in that area?" "No problem. I have different kinds of medicine that can treat all your problems." Before Darkwill finished his sentence, Klein took a step forward, afraid that he would end up being beaten to death. He put half his body between them as he said in a deep voice, "He's Roy King's student." "I figured. Roy King once described his traits." Carnot made way and invited the two in. His room was extremely tiny, with only a single bed and a cabinet which could be used as a dining table. The washroom was at the bottom of the bell tower. Darkwill pulled out a ring box and handed it to Carnot as he forced a smile. "My teacher got me to hand this item to you." Carnot stole a glance at it and was clearly relieved to see 4 points. He said to Darkwill, "You aren't as unreliable as your teacher described you to be. I can tell that you didn't attempt to use it. That would have awoken it and make it realize that it's no longer sealed." The chubby apothecary's face blushed red as he honestly said, "That's because it's relatively quiet now. In another 1 to 2 hours, it will automatically roll itself. It's best you think of a method to seal it again." Carnot's face twitched. "Again? "Well, I accidentally dropped it on the ground and then it came alive." Darkwill wanted to glance at his owl, Harry, but he realized that it hadn't followed him in. It was perched outside the bell tower to serve as a sentry. Carnot's eyes clearly widened as his hunched back nearly straightened. How did you arrive here? From his point of view, Roy King's student should have long died at the whims of the die. Darkwill hurriedly pointed to Gehrman Sparrow and said, "It's all thanks to this gentleman. He's a powerful adventurer. He provided the most effective protection and a temporary method of sealing the die." "What method was it?" Carnot blurted out the question. Klein laughed and replied, "Trade secret." Carnot's expression changed a few times as he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. "I thank you for your help on behalf of my organization." Darkwill continued, "Hiring him costs £1,000 and a request. The request is to help him find a mystical item with powerful offensive traits but without very serious negative side effects. He will purchase it at a reasonable price." I only had about £300, so that was all I could pay." "I'll have to rely on you to pay the rest." Carnot fell silent as the corners of his lips twitched. "I only have about £100. Suddenly, there was silence in the bellman's room. The wind from outside blew through the cracks and brushed across the three men's face. Finally, Carnot spoke again. "Perhaps Councillor Ricardo has the money. I'll lead you to him. From the looks of it, he trusts us. After all, a fate counselor is in no way comparable to a die of probability. If there were really problems with us, there would be no need for us to bring the die over to prevent any accidents and snatch away the uniqueness." Klein watched as Carnot picked up a lantern from the corner of the room. At this moment, he secret-activated his spirit vision and simply scanned the man. Klein nearly pricked up his brows with the sight. This was because Carnot's aura colors were rather unique. There were no problems with his emotional colors, as they were very ordinary. However, his ether body which represented his body appeared unnatural. His heart was green, his head was purple, and his digestive system was yellow. It felt like they were different parts which were mashed together in great disharmony. At the same time, Carnot's soul also gave the same feeling. A monster that was stitched up internally. Klein made a rough judgment based on what he knew. After Carnot got the lantern, he turned his head to glance at the adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, and said without much of an expression, "I'm very sensitive to spirit vision. I believe you have noticed certain problems. I'm not a naturally born person. I'm a product of the Church of Earth Mother's attempts to refine the human body. I'm considered a failed specimen, which is why I do not have the ability in that aspect." His final sentence was directed at Darkwill. Carnot didn't speak again as he carried the lantern and donned a black robe. He hunched his huge body and used the dim light to walk down the stairs of the dark and silent bell tower. Product of the Church of Earth Mother's attempts to refine the human body. But St. Draco Cathedral belongs to the Church of Storms. Since it's a failed specimen, no attention is paid to it. Carnot turned his back on the Church of Earth Mother and became a member of the Life School of Thought. This is understandable. Both the Church of Earth Mother and the Life School of Thought hold the apothecary pathway, and they will definitely have some overlapping. But why would the Life School of Thought send this fellow, that doesn't seem simple to be a bellman, to the Church of Storms? Is it just a normal disguise, or there's a particular connection between the two? Klein followed Carnot in a seemingly calm manner as he walked out the bell tower and circled round to a stone bridge. Just as he came close to the left side of the bridge, Klein suddenly felt something as he looked diagonally upwards. The owl, Harry, had flown out as well and landed on a tree branch. Kacha! The branch suddenly snapped as Harry plummeted. With great difficulty did it fly up again without falling to the ground. Darkwill was just about to say something when Carnot explained in a deep voice, "Councillor Ricardo is injured, so his powers are somewhat out of control. Once anyone enters a specific range, they will be tainted with bad luck." Carnot stopped in his footsteps as he threw the ring box containing the die under the bridge. "Mr. Counselor, Roy King's student has delivered the die." "Very good." A hoarse voice sounded from deep within the bridge's belly. A silver-scaled palm reached out from the darkness as he held down the ring box which had fallen onto the mud. Following that, he opened the ring box and took out the milky white die. His other hand, which was covered in silver scales, also reached out as he held a piece of a paper-like item made of leather. The item resembled a water pipe, but its ends were connected. It revealed a grayish-white color under the crimson moonlight. Its surface had many complicated symbols and labels, as well as many words in Hermes text which pointed to the snake of Mercury, Will Septon. Fate counselor Ricardo pulled the item apart and stuffed the die of probability into it before connecting the two ends together. Using fate at a small scale to seal the die of probability with periodic boundary conditions, making it remain in a perpetual state of slumber or calm? Indeed, Snake of Mercury Will Septon had foreseen such a situation and had made certain preparations. Klein retracted his gaze in relief, and he heard Ricardo's hoarse voice. I already know of your agreement, Mr. Gehrman Sparrow. I will help you find the mystical item after I've recovered. As for the 700 pounds, I'll immediately augment you with good luck. Go to the few casinos in Orevie and make some bets and you'll receive the corresponding reward. Remember, do not win more than 200 pounds at each casino. You must not win more than 700 pounds in total. Which is to say that you don't have the money either. Seeing how you're hiding while injured, it's considered normal not to have money with you. Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, okay. He waited for about 10 seconds without sensing anything. Counselor Ricardo heaved a sigh of relief and said, you have become sufficiently lucky. Is that so? Klein chose to believe him and didn't disturb Darkwill's report to a senior of how his teacher had been imprisoned. Based on Carnot's introduction, he found a nearby casino and sat at the blackjack table. After about 10 minutes, he walked out of the casino with a blank look. Not only did he not win money, but he had lost a total of 30 pounds. What happened to the good luck? Why did I believe him? That darn old man is terrible. Klein didn't hesitate to return to the stone bridge and approached its belly. That fast? You have pretty good luck. Ricardo laughed as he coughed under the dark bridge. At that moment, Darkwill and Harry had already found a nearby inn to live in. Klein replied without a change in expression, I lost. Lost? Ricardo ruminated over the word and couldn't formulate a sentence for quite a long period of time. In the dark environment, an ordinary owl nervously flew over. Chapter 6:12. In hand, the two street lamps on either side of the stone bridge silently illuminated the street, but they were unable to disperse the darkness beneath. Only the crimson moonlight from high above could barely illuminate the brown soil. Hidden under the bridge, Fate Counselor Ricardo remained silent for quite a while, making Klein suspect whether he had already passed away due to his heavy injuries. He guessed that a large reason as to why the luck augmentation had failed was because of this. Just as Klein was about to ask a probing question to determine the situation, Ricardo coughed and said in a deep, hoarse voice, You live up to the reputation of being a powerful adventurer capable of temporarily sealing the die. What happened has exceeded my expectations. Ahem, I'm very curious as to why my luck augmentation on you had failed. I'm very regretful that I can't come out and meet you in person. Otherwise, I should be able to see what beyonders from other pathways will find difficult to see, even if they possess relatively powerful spirit visions. This is the uniqueness that the fate pathway holds. So the problem lies with me? That's not the point. The point is that you need to reimburse me 700 pounds, no, 730 pounds. Klein cursed as he couldn't help but recall the orphan, Adamasol, who had the nickname of Monster in Tingen City. The young man who was equal to half a sequence 9 had cried out after seeing Klein before falling to the ground. His eyes bled, and the fear he exhibited was as if he had seen a devil. This is because of the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune's path of the divine, so he saw something wrong with me. He saw something related to the grey fog. Unfortunately, this fate counselor is quite heavily injured and has a domain of bad luck around him. There's no way for him to help inspect me. I should ask Snake of Fate Will Septon when I'm back. Perhaps he might know something. However, this pathway does have the bearing of a charlatan. He might not directly answer me and has a high chance of answering in vague terms. Klein maintained his expressionless attitude and said, "Then, what do you plan on doing?" Ricardo sighed and said, "Get Darkwill here. I'll augment him with good luck and get him to win the money at the casinos on your behalf." Using the name of the inn counselor Ricardo gave, Klein quickly found the chubby apothecary, Darkwill. Then, while carrying the suitcase and cane, Klein watched as he kept winning money at the major casinos. By midnight, he had already won £750. After receiving the remaining £730, Klein realized a problem. The reason for the luck augmentation's failure was because of him. Why is that so? Klein held close his bulging wallet and frowned as he thought silently to himself. He quickly thought of the thin, invisible grayish-white fog around him and realized the reason. After advancing to faceless, the gray fog has integrated with reality to a certain extent. Not only can it help me screen off ravings that aren't too powerful, but it can also destroy any influence that changes my fate to a certain extent. Therefore, this counselor's luck augmentation was ineffective. According to this logic, bad luck to a certain extent shouldn't affect me either. What the heck? It doesn't make me become some unlucky fool, but it also destroys my chance of being a lucky man or winner. Klein secretly shook his head and followed Darkwill and the owl back to the stone bridge. He informed Ricardo of how to summon his messenger and to immediately send him news once he obtained any information on a mystical item with powerful offensive traits. After doing all of this, Klein found an inn at the Orovie Island's port city and got a simple room for himself. Backlund. In the morning, Emlyn White walked under his favorite gloomy skies, moving through the thick fog that couldn't be compared to those in November or December as he once again arrived outside Northborough's 7 Pinster Street. After pulling the doorbell, he straightened his back as he lifted his chin and waited patiently. When Leonard opened the door, he looked at the handsome but detestable face before making way and allowing the visitor to enter. He was still dressed in his home wear, comprising of a white shirt and black trousers. However, he had an additional dark-colored vest draped over him. "Have you considered the matter?" Leonard asked with a smile. "No problem." Since it wasn't his money, Emlyn had no intention to haggle. He even believed that with the attitude displayed by Leonard, there was a high chance of having the price raised if he tried. Leonard gently nodded and smiled. "Very rich. I can tell that you're trying to lead me to say more." Emlyn silently scoffed and replied, "That's not something you need to concern yourself with." With that said, he raised the suitcase in his hand and opened it, revealing £7,000 in cash. Leonard took out each stack of cash and thoroughly checked it carefully. Then, he pulled off the red glove he wore on his left hand and handed it to Emlyn. "This is the mystical item you require. It can change colors to disguise itself. It's called Tinder. It can raise the wearer's charm, making his words be equipped with great persuasiveness. It can steal the beyonder power of a target within 50 meters. The more you understand the target, the easier it is to steal the power you wish to steal. The less you know, the more random it becomes, and it relies on luck. When the target is at sequence 6, there is a chance of failure. The higher the sequence, the higher the chance of failure. After the theft succeeds, the target will lose that beyonder power, and it will take at least 12 hours to recover. The owner of Tinder will be able to use it adeptly for 10 minutes. And the reason why it's expensive is because it has very few negative side effects." Emlyn, who silently took in the introduction, had his interest piqued by a mystical item like Tinder. He asked, "What are its negative side effects?" Leonard combed his hair and smiled. "First, when wearing it, there is a small probability of losing something on you. Second, when using it, a particular beyonder power belonging to you will be lost for at least 12 hours, but during this period, it will be the only beyonder power lost. In other words, even if it's used repeatedly, there will only be one power lost the entire time. Compared to the many sealed artifacts I know of, its negative side effects are indeed trivial." Emlyn cleared his throat as he nodded. He received Tinder and checked it carefully before taking out the stacks of cash from the suitcase and placing them on the coffee table. Following that, he placed the glove into the suitcase and didn't take it with him directly. With the suitcase, Emlyn returned to the Harvest Church just like he did before. Once he entered the priest's break room, he set up a sacrifice ritual. The illusory and mysterious door opened as the red glove tore through the dark and deep void as it was sent directly above the gray fog. At the moment the gray fog made contact with the glove, a tiny, distorted, terrifying face suddenly appeared. It kept evaporating as it struggled to sustain itself. Upon seeing this scene, Klein wasn't surprised. After all, the grandpa residing in Leonard's body was an angel of the Marauder pathway. If Amon could do it, it was quite certain that he was capable of doing the same. For this, he had made sufficient preparations. He believed that even if the grandpa had really reached Amon's level, he was able to wipe out the corresponding aura without making him sense the existence of the gray fog, making him take action on Emlyn. Picking up the sea god's scepter, which had long been placed in front of him, Klein made the blue gems light up at the same time from a commanding position. Suddenly, silver light bloomed above the gray fog as the lightning carried portions of the gray fog's powers like a storm, zapping the tiny illusory face. The face dissipated completely before it could even cry out, leaving behind a dead translucent worm with 12 transparent rings. Worm of time, but it seems weaker than Amon. Klein muttered as he beckoned with his hand for the red glove and familiar worm to fly to him. After some serious scrutiny, he confirmed that the worm was basically identical to the one Amon's avatar had left behind. My dear poet's grandpa is of the same sequence as Amon. Sequence 1. No, not necessarily. Chapter 613, Leonard's Investigation. Lone Kingdom, East Chester County, Stone City. Having left the manor, Audrey moved into a villa. After she finished engaging in social gatherings with the local nobles, she sent her servant to the Varvat Bank to withdraw a sum of cash. She didn't need to worry about this any further. She could easily pay off the £2,000 she owed Mr. Fool's Blessed, and she could also pay the £1,800 she owed Mr. World for the psychiatrist characteristic. 15 minutes later, Audrey opened the room to her bedroom and glanced at her personal maidservant, Annie, who was monitoring the servants while they did their work. She looked down at the golden retriever who was sitting by the side of the wall and smiled. With a smile, she suppressed her voice and asked with shining eyes, "Susie, you'll receive a gift in a while. Are you looking forward to it?" If it were in the past, Audrey would have definitely said, "Susie, your present is here," making the golden retriever realize that she could find the actual item in the room as well. Otherwise, it was very easy for Susie, who had been studying the basics of mysticism, to guess that Audrey had used ritualistic magic. With this new sentence structure, the situation could have Audrey receive a mysterious letter or news in her bedroom to confirm that the gift was about to be delivered. There would be too many possibilities as a result of this. Susie could read the joy and sincere attitude deep inside Audrey's heart as she subconsciously opened her mouth, hoping to stir the air to produce a voice. She had wanted to inquire about the gift, but she sharply sensed that Audrey's personal maid, Annie, was approaching. The alert Susie abandoned her original thoughts. She returned to the state of being an ordinary dog as she slowly wagged her tail to express her joy and anticipation. After making an excuse to head out, Audrey entered a chemistry laboratory that she had specially marked out for herself. She placed the psychiatrist characteristic and supplementary ingredients on the table. "Susie, do you still remember the potion concocting process?" She cleared her throat and straightened her back as she excitedly played the role of a teacher. "Woof, I remember." Susie already knew what her present was. In her joy, she barked. Audrey added, "Try to concoct it by yourself." Susie looked down at her paws and suddenly fell silent. Audrey was taken aback before a brief silence ensued. A few seconds later, before the golden retriever could speak, Audrey covered her mouth without any atypical response and giggled. "All right, Susie, there's no need to say a word. I know what you wish to say. You wish to express the fact that you're only a dog and am unable to concoct the potion, right? How embarrassing." At the same time, Audrey, who wore a charming and graceful external bearing, face-bombed herself inwardly. Woof! Susie nodded forcefully. Audrey took the opportunity and turned around. Soon, she finished concocting the psychiatrist potion. She had previously asked Susie and learned that she had already finished digesting the potion on Wednesday. That's less than 2 months. Yes, a large reason has to do with how Susie isn't being noticed. She can run about anywhere in the manor or villa and eavesdrop, allowing her to read the true thoughts of the maidservants. That's good as well. She will always share the tidbits with me. If not for her, I wouldn't have known of the dark sides of many people who appear normal and kind usually. Audrey poured the potion into a bowl and placed it on the floor. She watched as Susie went over and began licking the potion as she couldn't curb the anticipation in her heart. Susie might be influenced by the potion and become unstable. But it's all right. Psychiatrist Miss Audrey is already prepared to use placate at any moment. Yes, I prefer the name psychoanalysis. That sounds more professional. Audrey stared at Susie with her beautiful emerald-like eyes with great seriousness and discovered that Susie's pupils were gradually fading and turning vertical. Dark gold scales seemed to grow beneath her thick fur, and the spirituality that belonged to Susie kept radiating outwards as though it was interweaving with the entire villa space. After calming her somewhat nervous emotions, Audrey scrutinized Susie's state. As long as something abnormal happened to Susie, she would immediately use the beyond her power, psychoanalysis. Suddenly, Susie's voice sounded out in her ears. Audrey, I'm done. Audrey was temporarily at a loss on what to say. In her dream, Daisy returned to Eastborough and to the old apartment she had lived in for years. She pushed open the door and saw her mother, Liz, and her sister, Freja, doing the laundry diligently. Daisy instantly became delighted and was just about to join them. She was in charge of ironing the laundry. At this moment, she heard knocking at the door. She turned her head and realized that the visitor was a young man in a black and white checkered police uniform. The officer had black hair and green eyes, with a somewhat blurry face. He held a notebook and fountain pen as he asked, in the Capim case, apart from what you mentioned, is there anything else you didn't mention to us? It's all nothing important, Daisy answered in a rather groggy manner. The handsome officer looked down at his notebook and said, it's fine. I'm willing to listen. Daisy looked back at the clothes which were hung up, feeling as though she had forgotten some instructions. She honestly described all sorts of trivialities. In the end, she said. After I was abducted, my mother and sister had hired a private detective to search for me. His name is Mr. Sherlock Moriarty. He's a good man. This city had mostly immigrants from Lone. The cuisine wasn't much different from the east coast of the kingdom, with the only difference being that there were rare fruits and all sorts of seafood here. It was also quite a unique trait of the city. This place was rich in natural resources and was located in a key location on the safe sea routes. The standard of living was pretty good. Even the farmers in the suburbs could save up some money through their fruit gardens. This didn't mean that Orovie didn't have poor people or the lower class. This class was mainly made up of people who were former slaves. Lone's parliament had long abolished slavery. After chewing a juicy and sweet fruit, Klein watched the sky turn dark. He took a turn at the corner of the street and entered a bar named Sweet Lemon. It was a famous gathering place for adventurers in Orovie. Klein planned on buying the 2 remaining supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright Master, the relatively common Drago tree bark and Sonia Golden Spring water. At this moment, the bar was rather lively. There were many people holding up cups around the boxing ring as they cheered loudly. There were people who looked like adventurers at the surrounding tables. They were discussing all kinds of rumors in hushed tones. Just as Klein was squeezing towards the bar counter, he suddenly heard his name. I'm Gehrman Sparrow. You should know who I am. I received a treasure map and need to hire some helpers. It's not because I'm afraid, but it's because I can't carry that much treasure alone. a green-eyed man in his 30s held half a glass of liquor and spoke to 2 men and 2 women in the corner. It was a mystery if they were merchants or adventurers. You are also named Gehrman Sparrow? Treasure map. Why does it sound like a scam? My killing of Wormtongue has already reached this place from Byam. Yes, it was likely communicated via a telegram or visitors. Therefore, many people know of my name and deeds but do not know what I look like. Cheats are using this opportunity to pass themselves off as me to cheat others. Klein moved over as he came to a realization. The green-eyed man drank a mouthful of liquor and slammed the glass onto the table. I don't mind whether you refuse or agree, but I hate it when people make me wait. Do you wish to be like Wormtongue? The young man opposite him said, slightly intimidated, I know you're a powerful adventurer, so? The green-eyed man cut off the man's words. At that moment, he felt his collar tighten as he was lifted up by someone and thrown out the door. Klein didn't provide an explanation as he directly threw the man out of the door with a stoic expression. Then, he drew his revolver and aimed it at the spot where the man had fallen to the ground. He pulled the trigger without any hesitation. Bang! Just as the green-eyed man fell to the ground, he saw a spark light up at the ground near his crotch. Chapter 614, Adventurer Association. Klein sat in front of the bar counter and slammed his fist onto the counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. Behind him, a few bouncers hesitated about whether to come over to give him a warning or pretend that no one had fired a shot. The bartender signaled to the bouncers with his eyes as he picked up a glass and chuckled. Why don't you try a cup of sweet lemon? Our boss once went to Trier to learn cocktail mixing. He has mastered many of the cocktail recipes left behind by Emperor Roselle, and he has created the most popular sweet lemon in Orovie on his own. Klein wasn't moved as he calmly replied, I only drink beer. All right, the bartender wasn't in a rush to get the bottle of Southville beer as he said with a smile, Sir, are you an adventurer? Klein nodded without saying an answer. The bartender didn't hesitate as he said with a smile, Perhaps you should meet our boss. He's very friendly to new adventurers and is willing to treat them to drinks. Besides, there will be some aid offered to you. Klein, who had come with the intention of purchasing the supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright master, didn't reject the offer. He took out a brass penny and flicked it before catching it firmly. He placed the penny on the bar counter as a tip to thank the bartender for the information before slowly standing up and walking to the second floor under the lead of a bouncer, where he entered a room at the other end of the corridor. The room was covered with thick, brownish-yellow, soft carpet. There was a faint smell of high-quality coal burning, mixed with the aroma of a cigar. A middle-aged man with his blonde hair combed neatly backwards was leaning on a reclining chair, sucking at his cigar as he read the papers. Surrounding him were 6 bodyguards. Although Klein wasn't a beyonder of the spectator domain, and he was unable to determine any unique traits or the strength of these bodyguards, nor was he from the Mystery Prior or Monster Pathway, he could see certain secrets. He could notice things others wouldn't be able to discover, but his spiritual intuition made him believe that these bodyguards were definitely beyonders who could threaten him to a certain extent. The middle-aged man put down the newspaper and pulled at the collars of his black shirt before slowly standing up. He extended his right hand and said, Welcome to Orovie, my adventurer friend. His blue eyes had a smile to them as he looked rather sincere. Klein extended his right palm and smacked palms with him without a word. He was waiting for the man to speak. The middle-aged man pointed to a sofa opposite the reclining chair and chuckled. I'm the boss here, Bilt Brando. I was once an adventurer with quite considerable strength. I've lived to this day and have earned quite a bit. He's very confident with his strength, thus, daring to directly say it. Klein didn't stand on ceremony as he sat down. He leaned his body slightly forward as he expressionlessly waited for Bilt to begin talking. Seeing no response from the adventurer, Bilt sat down again and sucked at his cigar before leisurely saying, To be honest, there's a motive behind me meeting with every new adventurer. He pointed to the sea map on the desk in the table. He said with a magnetic tone, East from the Rorstad archipelago is where the sea gets progressively messier. The strength of the military and church began to dwindle, to the point of them only being able to protect their own harbors. The sea around here is a pirate playground, extremely disadvantageous to us adventurers. Therefore, I wish to organize everyone to form a loosely connected alliance, so that we can band together when faced with danger. This alliance doesn't have any strong binding terms. You can choose to turn a blind eye when other adventurers encounter danger, and no one will punish you. However, if you were to encounter a similar situation, don't hope for help to be provided. In addition, I can promise one point: adventurers of the Alliance will be able to get the prices of the lowest nature when purchasing items from me. When selling their spoils, they will at least get market price. After finishing the description, Bilt smiled at the new adventurer. He chuckled and asked, "What do you think of it? Are you interested in joining this loose alliance? Don't worry. You won't need to make any additional payment. Our purpose is only to render assistance when faced with pirates." Klein nodded. "It sounds pretty good." I think so too. I once thought of naming this association the Adventuring Brotherhood, but I felt that Brotherhood is overly constrained, so I changed it to Adventurer Association," Bilt said in a self-deprecating manner. Having said that, he lowered his hand with the cigar and smacked his lips. He shook his head and smiled. "Sorry, I forgot to ask your name." Klein maintained his posture and replied in a deep voice, "Gehrman Sparrow." Gehrman Sparrow. Bilt's eyelids jumped as his smile instantly stiffened. The guards around him clearly tensed up as though they were facing a formidable enemy. Bilt rapidly composed himself and didn't verify whether he was the real Gehrman Sparrow or a cheat who was only passing off as Gehrman Sparrow. He chuckled and said, "Is there anything you wish to buy? I have quite a lot of good stuff over here." "Sonia's golden spring water," Klein said with a calm expression while inwardly feeling cautious. He didn't mention the Drago tree bark since there was a high chance of buying the ingredient at herb stores. Bilt Brando heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "Easy. 30 pounds for 100 milliliters, trust me. Even if you head to Sonia Island, it will only be a few pounds cheaper than this price." Chapter 6:15, Grayish-white fog. While Miss Justice was doing the greetings, the hermit Katlia maintained her silence as she observed as she did before. She didn't involve herself in matters, as though she was an outsider at this gathering. She watched as Miss Justice and Miss Magician conjured their Roselle diary pages to pay off their previous debts. Then, she carefully glanced at Mr. Fool without daring to look straight at him. Yet, she still wasn't able to see further through the special gray fog. Her dark purple eyes were only capable of seeing clothes that were definitely conjured. With the 3 pages of Roselle's diary, Klein wasn't in a rush to read it like before. After all, he had already interacted and used a Grade 0 sealed artifact and knew what a uniqueness of a Beyonder pathway looked like. He had even intimidated such a divine artifact, so he believed that regardless of Emperor Roselle's content, there was nothing that could shock him greatly. Unless he was given a demoness blessing by some powerhouse with a unique ability and temporarily became a woman. Klein joked inwardly as he surveyed the long bronze table in interest. Ma'am Hermit's curiosity is different from Miss Justice and Company's. She pays great attention to the matter of Roselle's diary." Klein retracted his gaze and took note of this discovery. Then, he casually read the yellowish-brown goatskin. April 22nd. We plan on entering, to explore the abyss. April 23rd. We followed the pitch-black ocean, passed through the liquid-like fog, and arrived at the mountain peak that resembled a monster. Behind it was endless black fog. It seemed to blanket an entire continent. However, looking at the bottom of the peak makes it seem endless and without limit. I had joked with Edwards that if I were to commit suicide by jumping off that cliff, I might never fall to the ground, forever in a state of falling. Upon seeing this, Klein nearly pricked up his brows. He couldn't believe that Roselle would dare to organize his own knights and sailors to explore the periphery of the region after seeing the abyss. Isn't he afraid of dying? Legend has it that it's a place that can corrupt everything, causing all life to perish. At this stage, Roselle definitely hadn't reached sequence 4, and he wasn't a demigod. He was at best a sequence 5, or even lower. If it were me, I definitely would have turned the boat around and reported it to the church. In that instant, Klein gained a deep understanding of the huge difference between him and Roselle. In addition, Roselle's description of the abyss's periphery had reminded Klein of the mysterious stone doors of Amon's mausoleum. A similar scene had appeared after the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop Horemic's puppet made contact with it. I wonder what Roselle discovered there. At the very least, he didn't die from his exploration. He still had an exciting life after that. Klein moved his gaze down and read the remaining content on the diary page. April 24th. We proceeded down the peak in an attempt to probe deeper. The thick black fog is biting cold, as though it can erode flesh and the soul. Haha, luckily, the Dark King I'm on board has certain items that resist this corruption, or I'll suspect that me and my Knights of the Apocalypse will become members of Farron's Undead Legion. It's very quiet, and we didn't discover anything. April 25th. We saw devils, but they were in the form of rotting corpses. Behind the black, jagged mountain, below a slush-filled opening that one cannot call a path, there were different devil corpses that were either in normal or unimaginable places. It was as though they had all been killed at the same moment. April 26th. Either corpses or silence, there's no end up ahead. The items on the Dark King has begun to show signs of corruption. I've seldom had fear over the past few years, but here, that fear of the unknown is like an invisible hand that clasps my heart tightly. I have to leave. I have to return. I can't stay here any longer. What happened after this? Emperor Roselle was very successful in escaping the abyss's periphery, or did he encounter something else? What does the abnormality over there symbolize? An intense battle? Klein subconsciously had some sense of anticipation as he flipped to the second page, only to be let down that it wasn't connected. May 8th. My beloved Bernadette is almost 2. The older she grows, the more likable she is. She's indeed a young lady who doesn't let down the excellent genes of her mother, and I, hearing her clearly call me daddy and seeing her bubbly figure, I suddenly felt a sense of satisfaction. Ever since I transmigrated to this world, I've done many things. I can say that some aren't honorable, but I've not felt any shame about it, nor have I ever regretted it. On the one hand, this has to do with me finding it very difficult to curb my desires, making it easy for me to be influenced by my environment. I have to thank fate that I've not met a desire apostle from the devil pathway. According to the records, I would definitely succumb to beyonders of this sequence. I might even be instantly killed. On the other hand, I still have a sense of alienation from this world. My parents in this world are very nice to me. I've also worked hard to make them proud, but I know that my feelings for them aren't substantial. Similarly, this is how I treat Matilda. It's more a possessive instinct rather than love. I have to admit that my mental state is like playing a role-playing game in virtual reality. My parents, brothers, and friends are all non-playable characters. I can devote some of my feelings to them, but never anything serious. Therefore, I can join all kinds of corrupted gatherings without any sense of guilt. I can face people I know well in a cold, ruthless manner. It's just like when I played the Elder Scrolls. I could slaughter an entire village just for a chicken. But after Bernadette was born, I realized that I had an additional sense of belonging to this world. I was no longer as estranged from it. This is my child, a living child of mine. Perhaps this is what so-called maturity is. Without children, it's impossible to realize this feeling. No, I don't even have a girlfriend. However, I have to be alert about this state of mind that's mentioned in this entry. It might not exist in the past, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't appear in the future. The higher the sequence, the greater one's godhood is than their humanity. Klein sighed silently as he flipped to the third diary page. January 6th, a brand new year, a brand new beginning. After advancing to artisan, I finally have the powers to do that thing. That is to create the mysterious silver plate in my memories. There is a high chance that my transmigration was a result of it. In fact, after I became a savant, I could already recall its appearance, as well as the strange symbols and patterns on its surface. But the past me could clearly sense that I wasn't able to replicate something like that. January 9th. I finally succeeded after repeated failures. Holding the silver plate filled with special symbols and patterns, I tried hard to inject my spirituality in a bid to activate it. An endless grayish-white fog seemed to surface before my eyes, but nothing happened. Is it a problem with the material, or am I lacking certain requisites? January 10th. According to my recollections of my transmigration experience, I restored my past state, believing that I no longer lacked anything. However, the mysterious silver plate only showed me the strange gray fog. It wasn't able to help me do anything. Since this doesn't work, how did I succeed in my transmigration back then? I temporarily gave up on my attempts, and I destroyed the silver plate I created. Perhaps when I'm a high-sequence beyonder and become a demigod, I will have a way to interpret those patterns and symbols to figure out the truth behind my transmigration. Yes, I'll definitely become a demigod. I'm the protagonist of this era. Grayish-white fog. The Emperor saw an endless grayish-white fog after replicating the mysterious silver plate from Earth. Klein's eyes suddenly shrank when he read the diary entry. There happened to be an immutable endless gray fog beneath his feet. Could it be that our transmigrations have to do with this mysterious space? But why is the Emperor unable to enter, but I can? According to the Emperor's diary entries of the last few stages of his life, he definitely didn't crack the mystery of the silver plate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have not thought of this place when he was in his moment of great despair and mania. He wouldn't have not used this place as his crutch. Klein raised his head as his gaze landed outside the ancient palace. He recalled that deep in this mysterious space, there was a staircase of light that seemed to lead to heaven. It seemed to correspond to his sequence. The staircase appeared to be built for giants, and its destination was the gray fog which seemed to support something that stood in midair. The secret of our transmigration lies there. Klein made the diary pages in his hand vanish before he leaned back into his chair and said with a normal tone, "You may begin." Derek originally wished to bring forward his request to purchase the Sequence 6 potion formula after Solar High Priest, but Elder Lovia's release made him temporarily abandon his plans. He couldn't wait to mention everything that had happened, wishing to obtain the necessary guidance. Considering how this was still the transaction segment, he held back his desire as he waited in silence. There's something on Little Sun's mind. Something unexpected happened in the City of Silver. Audrey thoughtfully retracted her gaze and similarly didn't request to purchase anything. At this moment, Alger surveyed the area and voiced out. I need the potion formula of Ocean Songster. Indeed, he's already a Sequence 6, a wind-blessed. Isn't he someone from the Church of Storms? Why is he looking for the Ocean Songster's potion formula elsewhere? Obtaining it internally from the church is a lot easier. He has secrets he wishes to keep from the Church of Storms, or was he just pretending to be someone from the Church of Storms? Katlia instantly had many theories as she gently took note. I can help you take note. Upon noticing the hermit's response, Alger asked, Ma'am, is there anything you need? I can search for clues ahead of time, so as to trade for the potion formula. Chapter 6:16, Silver Lining. What do I need? Katlia silently chuckled, having sensed that the hanged man was probing her with a very ordinary question. Any needs meant clues. Ignoring the fact that I've already obtained the potion formula for Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior pathway, and accumulating points for one of the main ingredients, even without anything, I have no lack of corresponding resource channels, and far more than one. Katlia had another thought as she recalled the sea god scepter which Mr. Fool wielded. She then smiled and said, I need a mystical item at the demigod level. The kind with acceptable side effects. At that instant, Alger nearly retorted, asking her not to crack a joke. Even in the Church of Storms, one wasn't necessarily capable of obtaining a similar item for years, much less a Beyonder who was obviously only a mid-sequence Beyonder. If I had an item at the demigod level without any real negative side effects, why wouldn't I keep it for my own use? Alger knew that the hermit was using mockery to respond to his attempt at sounding her out, but he wasn't as irascible as his peers. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "I'll keep an eye out. But ma'am, you should know very well that just an effective clue towards such an item might be enough to cover the cost of an ocean songster's potion formula." Very stayed. Not easily angered. This is very different from the usual style of the Church of Storms. Was the conclusion of my first observation wrong? He's only disguising himself as a priest of the storm. No, I can't think of it that way. This might also be because he doesn't dare to flare up under Mr. Fool's watch. Or perhaps, he's just an odd one out in the Church of Storms. There might not be many, but it's not extremely rare. Catlia wasn't greedy. She didn't sound him out a second time as she nodded. I know. As the conversation between the two came to an end, no one made any requests during the transaction segment. A number of members already had the means to obtain whatever they needed, so there was no need to make any requests for purchases. It was mainly Audrey and Furs who were waiting for the subsequent potion formulas. Another reason stemmed from their financial situation or circumstances, and they weren't able to make any early expenditures. This included Emlyn, who was filled with desire for the Sanguine's Viscount inheritance, as well as Miss Magician who wanted a mystical item. Indeed, as everyone slowly cast off their statuses as low-sequence Beyonders, advancements are no longer that fast. The rate of transactions will also rapidly drop. In the past, there was basically 1 or 2 deals every week, but now, it might be 2 to 3 weeks. In the future, it might even be 3 to 4 months. Without knowing whether it was for the better or worse, Clyde nodded gently to indicate that it was time to engage in the free exchange. Audrey looked at Derek and waited for him to describe the unexpected situation at the City of Silver. Derek didn't let her expectations down. Before anyone could speak, he earnestly said, "Elder Lovia has been released. I encountered her at the library." "Shepherd Lovia has been released?" Using flesh and blood, the entire team that she led was corrupted by the true creator, so how can she be without any problems? What is the 6-member council thinking? Klein originally wanted to say something along the lines of, "If there's nothing wrong with Lovia, I'll chop off my head and gift it to the true creator to be kicked like a ball." However, considering how swears and curses involved deities in them and might lead to terrible consequences, he rationally changed his thoughts. "Of course, I don't have to be that careful with me above the gray fog." He sighed inwardly. "Elder Lovia has been released? That shepherd?" Audrey quickly recalled what the name meant. Back then, Little Sun had used Blasphemer Amon's possession and Mr. Fool's help to expose the fact that the entire exploration team had been corrupted by the true creator. As for the team, it was led by Lovia. Her job as a shepherd happened to correspond to the secret suppliant pathway of the true creator. Yes. Derek nodded earnestly as he looked towards the hanged man. Alger thought for a moment before asking, "Has your chief returned to the City of Silver?" Why would Mr. Hanged Man suddenly ask about this? Ah, right. To release such an important figure, it's impossible that the other elders of the 6-member council wouldn't wait for the chief's return. If the chief has yet to return, and that they had decided this without his consent, it goes to show that the situation is even more terrible than one can imagine. It was so terrible that they couldn't even await his return. If the chief has already returned, then the reason for releasing Lovia has a high chance to do with the outcome of the exploration. This is because, according to Little Sun, this is the only exploration in recent times for the City of Silver. Sigh, why didn't I think of this? Audrey, you're still lacking in experience. Audrey reflected and consoled herself in thought. Yes, not long ago. Derek was surprised by Mr. Hanged Man's accurate guesses. At this moment, Furs, who had been listening quietly, combined what she knew from before and suddenly had an idea. Mr. Sun, could this be the situation? Your chief led the exploration team and that little boy, Jack, to seek out a path that leads to the outside world, but they realized that the power of the true creator is required. Heh, this isn't a lie I'm fabricating, but an inference of the facts. The father of that boy, Jack, belonged to the Aurora Order, and they were seeking the holy residence of the true creator before arriving where you are. Therefore, for the entire city of Silver, your chief decided to release Shepherd Lovia after returning. If that's really the case, Mr. Sun would be in grave danger, Audrey said with worry. Furza's words sank Derek's heart. At this moment, Alger shook his head. No, I have the exact opposite belief. Miss Magician's inference is identical to my theory, but I believe this will make it safer for the Sun. Why? Derek's heart calmed down as he asked. Isn't that simple? Balance. Klein scoffed inwardly. The danger of the true creator is noticeable by any sentient creature with eyes and a brain. Your chief will definitely not put all his chips on him. He definitely needs a force that can counterbalance the true creator. As for you, the one who exposed their ploy, you were possessed by Blasphemer Amon, so you might represent another possibility. The more Lovia and company wish harm upon you, the more the chief and the other elders will protect you. This way, they would turn a blind eye to whatever suspicious aspects you didn't manage to erase, Alger explained simply. This ends up being a silver lining? Furs was stunned. Mr. Hanged Man makes a lot of sense. When it comes to analyzing matters in the situation, I'm still far from matching him. Audrey felt somewhat depressed. She even thought of puffing her cheeks, but she immediately realized that it wasn't an elegant act. All she could do was keep those thoughts to herself. For the rest of the members, Emlyn, who didn't know much about Lovia, had a hard time keeping up. However, he knew about Jack and the repeated cycles, so he was barely able to understand the discussion. In order to break out of the City of Silver's conundrum, they released a danger that has the true creator involved. Emlyn inwardly made a guess. Compared to him, Katlia couldn't understand a word. She felt as though she was from a completely different world compared to the other members. I actually have a feeling of admiration despite my incomprehension of what they said. The last time I had this feeling was several years ago. Back then, I was still very weak. There were some inklings in the previous tarot gatherings, especially so when it involves the City of Silver, but never has it been as serious as this time. Also, why are they discussing the true creator and Blasphemer Amon so naturally? It should be the Blasphemer Amon I know of. They're only mid-sequence Beyonders. What have they actually done in the past? Katlia's confidence as a powerhouse suffered a setback at that very moment. After hearing Mr. Hanged Man's analysis, Derek first heaved a sigh of relief before asking with tense nerves, could this result in our City of Silver being destroyed by the fallen creator? He originally wished that Mr. Hanged Man could provide him with an answer that could relieve him, but he ended up hearing the man say in a deep voice, that possibility can't be ruled out. Then what should I do? Derek earnestly sought advice. Chapter 617. The mysterious Adam, the son of the creator? Alger was stunned by the hermit's description as he couldn't help but twitch his brows. However, he didn't directly inquire further because this could very likely expose certain matters. Besides, he was very confident that there would be other members asking. The son of the creator? Furs asked with piqued interest. She never expected that Amon had such a shocking identity, aside from the titles like Blasphemer and King of Angels. She was filled with curiosity over this. Katlia swept her a look and said without a change in tone, legend has it that back when the original creator split into the various deities and races, his body produced two babies. One of them was Blasphemer Amon. The mural inside Amon's mausoleum was somewhat different from your description. Back when Amon and Adam was born, the creator had just awoken and withdrew the authorities of the ancient gods. He was seated high on a holy mountain and was surrounded by angels as they praised him. There were no signs of him dying or splitting. That mural does have something in common with the City of Silver's historical records. Perhaps the creator had really awoken twice. And perhaps the original creator and Amon's father, the creator as recorded by the City of Silver, aren't the same person. Both of them have an inheritance relationship. As Klein listened to Ma'am Hermit's description, he began theorizing. Amon is actually the son of the creator. Such a status is in no way inferior to the true gods. As for Mr. Fool, our tarot club was able to easily purify his avatar and stop his possession. Audrey recalled the past matters and suddenly felt that she had unknowingly exceeded many ordinary beyonders. The circles and levels of knowledge exposure that the two groups had differed by more than 100 times. She asked with piqued interest, Ma'am Hermit, do you know the other son of the creator? Adam, Katlia answered succinctly. Audrey was clearly taken aback. This was because her question only required a yes or no. After receiving the confirmation that she knew, she would ask for the details and make it clear that she was willing to pay for it. Who knew that Ma'am Hermit had directly given her the name, Adam? She doesn't seem to care too much about such information. She's in control of a lot of information. Audrey managed to infer certain matters through this detail as her eyes darted about. I've never heard of an important figure named Adam. I haven't either. Apart from being recorded as the son of the creator, it's like he has never appeared before. There are nearly no traces of him in the history of the fourth epoch, Katlia answered frankly. This Adam is very mysterious. I'm already rather well versed in the fourth epoch's 3 empires of Solomon, Tudor, and Trunsoist, as well as the angel families that come under them. Yet, I've never heard of him before. If it wasn't for Rhodes who live-streamed the Church of Steam and Machinery's exploration of Amon's mausoleum, I wouldn't have even known his name. Has he long perished, or is he hidden in the dark while scheming something? Klein sighed inwardly. Audrey subconsciously glanced at Mr. Hanged Man and discovered him shaking his head as well. Amon is a king of angels, so it doesn't make sense for Adam to not be one. There should be records in the City of Silver. Audrey looked at Derek. For some reason, Derek easily understood what was on Miss Justice's mind. He said in slight embarrassment, we do not know about Adam, just like how we don't know about Amon. I was previously searching for ancient tomes related to the King of Angels. I believe that I was lacking in clearance as my sequence was still low at that time. I will continue searching for information on this. King of Angels. Katlia moved her fingers indiscernibly as she memorized the phrase. She knew that Miss Justice would definitely answer if she asked, so without waiting, she directly asked, Amon is a king of angels that all of you are referring to? Yes. To thank Ma'am Hermit for her generosity, Audrey explained in detail, in the records of the City of Silver, the Creator had many angels attending to him. Among them, the leaders of the angels who were closest to the throne of God were deemed King of Angels. We haven't managed to confirm many King of Angels. One of them is the Angel of Fate Ouroboros who originates from the ancient tomes of the City of Silver. His title is Tail Devourer. The second is Medici, who Mr. Fool happened to mention. We are still unsure of his title. The third is a guess. We suspect that Amon is the Angel of Time among the King of Angels. Since he is a King of Angels, Adam, who is also a son of the Creator, is very likely one as well. Haven't managed to confirm many. I don't even know the term, King of Angels, but you have already grasped half of them. That's not many. None of your sequences are higher than mine. Katlia nearly became speechless. Only at this point did Emlyn really understand the meaning behind a King of Angels. He decided to use these names to seek out traces of the King of Angels via the secret historical records the Sanguine had in their control after he returned to the real world. Katlia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, Mr. Sun, you were once possessed by Amon? Yes, it was his avatar, Derek answered honestly. However, he was purified by Mr. Fool. I wasn't injured at all. Purified by Mr. Fool. Katlia couldn't hold back the urge to look at the end of the long bronze table. She originally imagined that she had a general idea of Mr. Fool's state, believing that he was still in a state of reawakening and was unable to use much of his powers. This was why he sought the identity of Sea God and obtained that scepter. However, the present situation shook the foundations of her speculation. She felt that Mr. Fool was like an iceberg. What was hidden beneath the surface was even more terrifying and unfathomable. He easily thwarted Amon's plans. Under certain situations, he can briefly break through the restrictions and produce strength at the level of a god. Katlia's heart sank as she didn't ask further. She cautiously shut her mouth. At this moment, Audrey had thought of something that puzzled her because of this topic. She proactively asked, "Ma'am Hermit, after Amon's avatar was purified by Mr. Fool, a worm with 12 transparent rings was left behind. It's said to be a worm of time. Is that correct?" Katlia recalled for 2 seconds before saying, "Yes." "Which pathway does it belong to? I mean, which Beyonder pathway does the Blasphemer pathway belong to?" Audrey pressed out of curiosity. Katlia answered directly without any thought, "The Marauder pathway. Legend has it that at the saint or angel level, they are able to fool fate and cheat the rules, becoming a parasite of time." Sounds very impressive. Audrey marveled inwardly before asking, "Then, what can a worm of time be used for?" "Nice question." Klein secretly cheered for Miss Justice. He pumped himself up as he waited for Ma'am Hermit to give the answer. He happened to have a worm of time in his junk pile. It's a material with rich spirituality and unique effects. It can be used in particular rituals or be used to create high-level charms. But as for how, I'm not sure. After Katlia answered, she suddenly sighed. She recalled the nightmare of being constantly pursued by knowledge, as well as the massive amount of information that could seemingly burst her brains. But even so, she still didn't know a lot. If the hidden sage hadn't gone mad and could provide knowledge bit by bit, I'll actually be more than happy to learn from him. Katlia secretly sighed. All that matters is that it's useful. As for how it's used, I have other people to consult. Klein controlled the world with great satisfaction and looked at Emlyn. "Mr. Moon, I have something I would like to communicate with you in private. Aren't the transactions over?" Emlyn nodded, feeling somewhat uncertain. "Okay." The world immediately requested for Mr. Fool's permission and successfully obtained the privilege of isolating everyone. Then, he looked at Emlyn White and said, "I wish for you to present to me every action which Leonard Mitchell made in your memories." "Why?" Emlyn asked in puzzlement. "It involves certain secrets," Klein controlled the world to answer succinctly. His true goal wasn't to buy that mystical item, but to observe Leonard Mitchell. That fellow has deep secrets. The world as well. For an investigation, he was willing to spend £7,500. However, that mystical item is indeed powerful. Isn't the world constantly seeking a way to eliminate the mental corruption in a Beyonder characteristic? This is likely useful. Emlyn suppressed his wandering thoughts as he seriously recalled Leonard Mitchell from his point of view. With Mr. Fool's help, he conjured a video in the form of streaming light. When the streaming light landed in the world's hands, Klein quickly browsed through it. He confirmed that Leonard really knew the existence of the grandpa, but he was unable to determine if he understood the danger. Temporarily suppressing any corresponding thoughts, Klein removed the isolation barriers and allowed the Tarot Club members to continue. At this moment, Audrey was reminded of something by Mr. World's private communication. She hurriedly looked at Furs and asked in concern, "Miss Magician, did you discover any abnormalities at William Street?" "That will require Mr. World to answer you," Furs said, having been put into a difficult position. Without waiting for Miss Justice to speak again, Klein controlled the world and hoarsely replied, "There were abnormalities. But I have already informed the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam. If there are any future problems, I might require your help." "All right." Audrey heaved a sigh of relief. informed the Church of Evernight and Steam. This. Katlia found the description ludicrous. From what she knew, a secret organization like the Tarot Club was a natural enemy of the official Beyonders. There was no room for any compromises between the two, but the way the world had dealt with it and the words he used had made it seem like the Tarot Club was an organization that cooperated with the official Beyonders. Colored by these feelings, she listened to the rest of the conversation before bowing and bidding farewell when Mr. Fool made the closing remark. Soon, Klein was the only one left above the gray fog. Chapter 618, Volunteer Work. Second floor of the Sweet Lemon Bar, in the boss's room. Bilt Brando held a cigar as he stood by the window. He was looking out, and his eyes were out of focus as he wore a dark and terrifying expression. At this moment, a bodyguard entered, bent his back slightly, and carefully said, "Sir, Sothoth has returned from the east. Let him in." Bilt tried hard to correct his expression. Sothoth Yan was his assistant, an important member of the Adventurer Association. In less than a minute, Sothoth, who was dressed in a linen shirt, brown jacket, and red headscarf, walked in. He looked to be in his 30s and had bronze skin. He had recessed eye sockets and a black mustache below and under his lips. He was obviously someone who spent most of his time at sea. Sothoth bowed rather informally and sized up Bilt Brando. "Boss, something happened?" "Yes, something happened. From the looks of it, it will fail." Bilt didn't keep the matter from him as he sighed. "I have no idea how I'm going to answer that important figure." Without waiting for Sothoth to answer, he asked, "Have there been any changes at the Eastern Front?" "Still the same as usual. The pirates are still after every ship they can plunder. They even target each other. The Navy is only able to guard the various colonial posts, and they're barely able to maintain smooth passage through the sea routes while protecting the relatively important ships. There are often sea battles with both sides obtaining victories at times," Sothoth said as he shrugged his shoulders. "The eastern front of the Sonia Sea is a pirate's playground," Bilt sighed in agreement. Sothoth thought for a moment and added, "There has been some recent news from the islands on the eastern front. Apparently it first originated from the Black Death." "Vice Admiral Ailment? What news is it?" Bilt asked, his interest piqued. Sothoth said with a solemn and excited tone, "Vice Admiral Ailment really encountered an assassination attempt and was seriously injured. And the person who attacked her was the adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow." "Gehrman Sparrow?" Bilt blurted out. "Yes, it's him. He really is a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral. Even if it was a sneak attack, it happened on the Black Death. There were so many infamous pirates around, but he managed to successfully escape after dealing a heavy blow to Vice Admiral Ailment. He later hunted Wormtongue Mither," Sothoth answered with affirmation while sighing. Bilt staggered before sighing. "That's important news. There are very few powerhouses at the pirate admiral level among adventurers. To be able to deal a heavy blow to a pirate admiral on her flagship while alone, such an operation can only be done if one is absolutely confident in themselves or crazy enough. Only a madman will infiltrate a pirate admiral's flagship in an attempt to assassinate her, instead of finding another spot." Having said that, his expression changed slightly. "I met an adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow last night." "For real?" Sothoth's pupils shrank as he asked solemnly. "I can't be sure since I've never met the real Gehrman Sparrow, or seen his photograph or portrait." Bilt shook his head. Sothoth thought for a moment and said, "You can search for the newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago to confirm his identity. So many days have passed. There should be tourists that would have brought over the corresponding news report and Sonia Morning Post. Yes, the government offices, police stations, churches, and charity organizations will subscribe to the important newspapers of the Rorstad archipelago." The Rorstad archipelago was the biggest colonial grounds of the Lone Kingdom in the central Sonia Sea. Its influence radiated outward, so there was no doubt that Oravi Island, which was within a distance of 3 days of travel, was part of its domain of influence. The official organizations and churches all subscribed to the newspapers and magazines of the area, so any non-crucial news would be received in 3 to 4 days. All right. Bilt nodded as he probed deeper. Do you have the exact details of Gairman Sparrow's assassination attempt on Vice Admiral Ailment? Sotha thought for a moment and said, It's said that Gairman Sparrow is able to change into anyone, just like Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. It's with that power that he successfully infiltrated the Black Death and found an opportunity to carry out the assassination. He can change into anyone. Bilt's eyes lit up. No, that won't do. That's a crazy guy who dares to infiltrate the Black Death to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment. He causes one to instinctively fear him and distance themselves from him. The light in Bilt's eyes dimmed. Furthermore, I don't even know if he's the real one or not. He subconsciously shook his head. I wonder when the Nighthawks and Machinery Hive Mind will take action and deal with the abnormality at William Street. I hope they do it as soon as possible. Amidst his thoughts, Klein left the gray fog and returned to the real world. After some consideration, he took out a piece of paper and laid it out on a brown desk. He wrote with a dark red fountain pen, asking about Mr. Azek's recent situation before mentioning how he had discovered that someone had a parasite in him while he was searching for a mystical item that could steal the beyonder powers of others. Following that, he seemingly asked in passing if there was a way to avoid the parasite and inform the host. With this as a topic starter, he added how he learned from others about information regarding the Worm of Time that was related to high-sequence beyonders from the Marauder pathway. He also mentioned that he knew that such an item could be used as a sacrificial item in important rituals or as a material in high-level charms. However, he had no idea how to produce them. Chapter 619, Unable to Speak. Oravi Hospice Foundation. The lady responsible for volunteer registration hurriedly bent her back as she frantically searched for the fountain pen which had dropped. At this moment, Klein also noticed that she was reading a news report paper from a few days ago. It was back when his portrait and escapades were published. This area subscribes to newspapers from the Rorstad archipelago as well. From the time it takes to sail between the places, it's true that they can only read news from 3 to 4 days ago. If I had known earlier, I would have worn a new face and thought of a fake name before coming. Klein stood in front of the desk as he thought helplessly. The lady in her 30s finally picked up the fountain pen, raised her head, and said with a trembling voice, Why you want to do volunteer work? Yes, Klein gave an affirmative answer. But you're an adventurer, the mortified lady stammered for an excuse. She instinctively didn't want such an extremely dangerous person to do volunteer work. Being famous isn't necessarily a good thing. Forget it. I'll switch my appearance and name before coming again. Klein had the intention of giving up as he questioned her without any emotion, who made the rules that adventurers can't do volunteer work. The lady responsible for the registration was on the brink of tears as she blurted out, It wasn't me. The volunteer registration room became abnormally quiet. Klein was first taken aback before he felt like laughing. It took him a great deal of effort to maintain Gairman Sparrow's image. After the lady calmed down, she sensed that her answer was clearly problematic. She forced a smile and said, No, I mean this isn't regulated by anyone. My impression of adventurers is that they are very busy. They need to be out at sea and have very little time to do volunteer work. That's them, Klein answered succinctly. The lady held her palm to her mouth as she revealed a smile. All right. I'll immediately help you with your registration. As she spoke, she pulled out a form and handed it over. Please fill it in. We will provide the corresponding training and volunteer jobs according to your requests. We will contact you, or you can always come over to inquire for any updates. She had already made up her mind not to put Gairman Sparrow's form into the docket. Instead, she would hand it directly to the Foundation's person in charge and the police. Goddess, why is this dangerous fellow here to do volunteer work? She secretly drew a crimson moon on her chest. Klein nodded in silence. He took the form and sat down. Picking up a fountain pen, he began filling in his basic information. During this process, a man in a doctor's gown entered and asked, "Joanna, are there any new volunteers? We'll begin the morning training." Joanna, who was in charge of the registration, had the intention to shake her head. However, Gehrman Sparrow, who sat opposite her, gave her an intense sense of pressure even though he remained silent and didn't raise his head. She didn't dare to lie. "There is," she first replied to the man and then looked at Klein. "Mr. Sparrow, do you wish to receive the basic training for volunteer work now, or do you wish to wait until tomorrow?" Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Now." He planned on familiarizing himself first, allowing him to show his professionalism at volunteer work after changing his identity. That way, he could quickly help out at a hospital. Joanna clearly drew a breath and said, "Then follow Mr. Gravia after you are done filling in the form." "All right," Klein replied calmly. Half an hour later, the calm and polite adventurer who had his madness hidden in him stared at the abnormally dirty toilet in front of him. He held his breath and said, "Scrub it." "Right, you have already received the basic training on how to carry a patient. However, that isn't the most common task we do at a hospital. We're mainly in charge of cleaning a patient's vomit or changing and washing the linen, as well as maintaining the cleanliness of the washroom. Matters such as bandaging wounds are left to the professionals. We only need you to have the basics grasped." Gravia pinched his nose as he pointed to the stained toilets. "A volunteer has already demonstrated it to you. Please begin." "This is very different from what I imagined." "Completely different." Klein's first reaction was to turn his back and leave, but he ultimately picked up the cleaning tools with a deadpan expression. He held back his disgust and went over before crouching down. Then, he leaned back a little as he extended his right arm. At noon, Klein took off his white gown and wore his top hat before leaving Oravi Hospice Foundation with a cold expression. He had serious second thoughts about continuing the volunteer work to find opportunities for real acting. Only when his carriage arrived at the Sweet Lemon Bar did he steel his resolve to continue the attempt. "I have to become a Nimblewright master in 1350 and digest the potion, so as to begin seeking the clues to become a high-sequence beyonder," Klein emphasized his goal once again. He retracted his emotions and entered the Sweet Lemon Bar. He spent 8 pence for apple cider marinated pork ribs and a piece of buttered bread. Together with a cup of rye beer costing 1.5 pence, they formed Klein's lunch. He finished eating in an unhurried fashion before using a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. He said to the bartender, "Where's your boss? I have something to talk to him about." Since he had already verbally agreed to join the Adventurer Association, Klein naturally didn't plan on missing the opportunity to use this loose alliance. He planned to ask Bilt Brando to contact unaffiliated artisans or artisans who were willing to moonlight. He wanted an artisan to create an item like Azek's copper whistle, so he didn't need to set up a ritual and chant the incantations every time he summoned his messenger. It was complicated, troublesome, and a waste of time. Of course, if Bilt Brando didn't know an artisan, Klein didn't plan on forcing the matter. After all, joining the Adventurer Association didn't require him to pay. The bartender pointed to the staircase and said, "He's on the second floor. If you've already agreed to join his association and have seen those bodyguards, then they'll let you up." Klein nodded indiscernibly and slowly got up before walking towards the staircase. Indeed, no guards stopped him. Only when he reached the second floor did a bodyguard approach him to inquire about his purpose. Thanks to his reputation as Gehrman Sparrow, he easily met Bilt Brando again. He also saw an unfamiliar man beside him. "My friend, Sothath Yan, an important member of the association." Bilt pointed to the man in a red headscarf. At the same time, he exchanged looks with the man and saw the seriousness and puzzlement in each other's eyes. After a simple greeting, Klein got a chair to sit on. He directly said, "I wish to obtain the help of an artisan. I wonder if the association is able to provide any clues." "Artisan?" Bilt sucked at his cigar and paused for a few seconds. He deliberated for a moment before saying, I do know an artisan, but he's unwilling to meet strangers. This will bring him grave danger. If you have any requests, then I can be the middleman. I believe I have the required reputation to do so. To most churches, mid- and low-sequence beyonders without any evil intentions could be ignored at times. However, artisans needed to be dealt with indiscriminately. Otherwise, the mystical items they created could flood the markets, bringing about extreme unrest to human society. From the looks of it, the Adventurer Association which Built organized isn't just wasting money. At the very least, it has amassed quite a lot of resources and information channels. Klein took out the Murloc bladder which he had long prepared. I wish to make this into a ring, mainly to provide one with underwater mobility. He temporarily didn't mention the messenger, planning to test the artisan's ability and Built's reputation. If the messenger summoning incantation became widely known, it would create quite a bit of trouble. A Sequence 9 Beyonder characteristic isn't expensive. Even if Built succumbs to greed and usurps the created mystical item, it doesn't matter. After all, I have a bunch of charms from the sea god domain. Furthermore, it's not like I can't find him to settle the debt. This is better. For him to be able to organize an adventurer association, he definitely has plenty of money and ingredients. As Klein's thoughts reeled, he couldn't help but size up Built. In that instant, Built shuddered for some baffling reason. All the hair on his back stood up. Chapter 620, Stand-in Mission. Inside the room, Sothoth pressed down on the edges of his eyes when he heard Built's sigh. He said in a deep voice, Boss, that important figure will arrive the day after tomorrow. Built's expression turned serious as he looked back. I know. We only have two choices. First, we ignore whether Gehrman Sparrow is worth trusting, and we entrust him with the mission. We can only hope for the best outcome. Second, we immediately abandon our business in Orevie, leaving with our cash and jewelry to become pirates at sea. I have the confidence to make most sailors and adventurers on the Pirate Hunter follow us. Sothoth paused before adding, Boss, back when you were an adventurer, leading our ship and hunting pirates, you were always this decisive and tenacious. I believe you have already made your decision. There's no need for me to do anything else. There's no need to suck up to me. Built smiled bitterly. I'm no longer the fearless pirate hunter who didn't fear blood or gunfire from before. Long periods of an easy and comfortable life have dulled my will. I don't even wish to seek out chances to advance. Those companions who had turned into monsters still live on in my mind. Phew. He exhaled as his expression instantly turned solemn. However, you're right. We don't have time to hesitate. We have to immediately make a decision. Having said that, Built turned his head and gestured at the window with his chin. Sothoth was taken aback for a moment before understanding what his boss meant. After leaving the Sweet Lemon Bar, Klein strolled by the side of the street, planning to hire a carriage at the crossroads. At this moment, he heard a window open above him and saw a figure jump down. Perhaps after experiencing the terrifying incidents involving the Antigonus family's notebook and Bancy Harbor's strange telegraph office, Klein's first reaction was that Built Brando was dead. He had suddenly died after his visit and was thrown down from upstairs, falling to the ground with his eyes wide open. This was just like how he saw Ray Bieber's mother dead in a reclining chair back then. The body was highly decomposed, and the eyeball fell to the floor because of the external disturbance. Similar thoughts flashed through his mind as Klein discerned the figure who had fallen from upstairs to be Sothoth Yan, not Built Brando. Furthermore, he looked normal and was clearly still alive. Oh no, here comes trouble. Klein's heart skipped a beat, having a more accurate guess. If it were himself, he definitely would have pretended not to see Sothoth Yan jump off the building to intercept him, running before the man could even say a word and until he shook him off his tail. It would be akin to how Admiral of Stars was being pursued by knowledge. Unfortunately, I'm currently Gehrman Sparrow. A crazy adventurer wouldn't flee because of such trivial matters. Sigh, getting to know myself better is an additional perk. Klein halted and watched as Sothoth firmly landed on the ground. He bowed with his hand placed over his chest. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow, we have a very important task to entrust you. Here it comes. Klein calmly replied, I won't be that free lately. This wouldn't waste too much of your time. You can first listen to what it is about before considering to reject or accept it, Sothoth said earnestly. I'm afraid I have no choice but to accept it after hearing it. Actually it's still all right. If Bilt Brando and Sothoth Yan threaten me to take the mission, I don't mind changing them into gold pounds and beyonder ingredients. Klein thought it through seriously and discovered that he didn't need to have too many reservations out at sea. Having the strength of a pirate admiral basically made him unstoppable in most areas. He took out the pocket watch in his inner pocket and opened it. I'm giving you 5 minutes. All right, that's enough. Sothoth pointed at the entrance to the Sweet Lemon bar behind Klein. Returning to the room, Klein glanced at the wall clock and said coldly, You still have 3 minutes and 12 seconds. His attitude gave Bilt a baffling sense of ease. He began to believe that Gehrman Sparrow definitely had the capabilities to complete the mission. Mr. Gehrman, I heard that you can transform into anyone, just like how Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos was formerly capable of doing so, Bilt hurriedly asked. Who revealed this matter? Klein pricked up his brows as his gaze towards Bilt turned gloomy. If news of Gehrman Sparrow being able to transform into anyone spread, it was quite troublesome for Klein. This was because this made others either think of creeping hunger, making them think of Kalangos's death, or they would think that he was a beyonder who had certain secrets and was suspected to be a faceless. The former would attract the attention of the Twilight Hermit Order, while the latter would attract the attention of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, who would send personnel to investigate. Of course, the Church of the Evernight Goddess wasn't a powerful force at sea, so Klein didn't need to worry too much about it. He just didn't wish to be in conflict with the Nighthawks. If that happened, he had no choice but to abandon his identity as Gehrman Sparrow. This was at the critical point where more and more people knew of the crazy and powerful adventurer who had a soft heart while he was being acknowledged and gaining feedback. Bilt sensed the change in Gehrman Sparrow's gaze as he tensed up. He chuckled and said, This was news released from the Black Death. Tracy. She's trying to seek revenge on me by doing so. One day, I'll successfully hunt her. Klein nodded slightly and said, You can think of it as real. He didn't explain how he received his powers of shape-shifting, as this didn't match Gehrman Sparrow's persona. Bilt heaved a sigh of relief and said after 2 seconds of silence, We're helping an important figure to search for a stand-in. Under Gehrman Sparrow's ambiguous gaze, he explained in detail, that important figure needs to independently deal with a secret matter that he doesn't want others to know of, therefore, he needs a stand-in to represent him in dealing with his daily affairs. He would meet different guests and socialize with his mistress without revealing a problem. He will take 3 to 5 days to return. We had already found someone who looked like him, spending a great deal of time to correct his posture and accent, and we had informed the good news to the important figure. Who knew that the tramp would overeat and suddenly die last night? That important figure is about to begin his operation. We do not have the time to look for another person who looks like him, so we can only seek your help. Isn't this the true acting opportunity I've been looking for? Klein was moved. However, he sharply noticed one point. To be addressed as an important figure by Bilt, leader of the Adventurer Association, it definitely meant that the person was an important figure. Matters that happened around an important figure were often not simple. It contained quite a considerable risk. Klein thought for a moment before asking in a deep tone, Do you think that this matter will be dangerous? No, as long as you aren't exposed, there shouldn't be any danger. You need to represent the important figure and appear at social conventions. No one would dare assassinate him. Yes. I know what you're worried about. You're afraid that this important figure would silence everyone who knows about this matter after it's done. Don't worry, the pirates have fabricated plenty of vicious rumors about him, so even if this matter succeeds, no one will believe it even if you divulge this in the future. It will only be treated as a joke, Bilt said with a smile as he spread his hands. Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "What kind of payment are you offering?" £1,000, and 3 chances to get the artisan to make something for you. Heh, I'll pay for all expenses apart from the materials. Bilt made an offer which he believed Gehrman Sparrow wasn't unable to resist based on what had been previously entrusted to him. It's not bad. Besides, it gives me a chance to do true acting. Klein took a look at the wall clock and said, "I'll return and consider. I'll give you the answer in the evening." Regardless, he had to head above the grey fog to divine the level of danger. Considering how Bilt and Sothoth were Sequence 7, or even Sequence 6 Beyonders, Klein didn't directly request to head to the washroom in front of them to prevent them from sensing a problem. As the important figure's identity hadn't been revealed, Bilt wasn't too worried. He nodded. "All right. I hope for a pleasant partnership." William Street. A stout man from Fasak who was nearly 2 meters tall was searching for clues. Suddenly, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as he looked up. Light which resembled the morning sun's rays surfaced around his body, illuminating the surrounding houses and street lamps as though they were illusions. At the same time, sparks soared on the street as all kinds of supernatural phenomena appeared. Indeed, the Sauron family has sent people over. The man from Fasak who had his suspicions cast his gaze straight down the street. He saw nighthawks wearing red or black gloves as black gun barrels covered with complicated patterns extended out of the rooftops. They were aimed at him while the surrounding passers-by didn't seem to notice anything amiss. He also saw the Church of Steam and Machinery's Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, Horamik, and the Church of the Evernight Goddesses Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese, St. Anthony. Immediately following that, he caught sight of members of the Sauron family raising their hands above their heads through the corner of his eye. The powerful Fasak spies also did the same thing. They had decisively chosen to surrender. Resistance only spelled certain death. There was still a chance of being repatriated by surrendering. At 6:30 that evening, Klein once again came to the Sweet Lemon Bar where he met Bilt and Sweet Lemon Bar. He expressionlessly said, "An advance of £500. Then, you will need to tell me who I'm supposed to change into." Bilt couldn't hold back his smile as he gestured for Sothoth to collect the funds from the safe while saying with a deep voice, "He's the kingdom's highest-ranking navy commander of the Central Sonia Sea. His Excellency Admiral Emirius Revolt. A real demigod." Chapter 621, Governor General's Office Banquet. Admiral Emirius Revolt. A true demigod. Upon hearing Bilt's reveal, a few words immediately appeared in Klein's mind. "I'm sorry. Bye." Gehrman Sparrow pricked up his brows slightly as Bilt hurried to explain, this wouldn't influence the difficulty of the mission. There's no need for anyone to display a demigod's powers throughout the duration of the mission. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. To make the mission not as difficult, His Excellency has specially arranged for him to inspect the Oravi naval base for a few days. This way, he doesn't need to stay in the Central Sonia Sea's Navy headquarters, the City of Generosity, Byam. As such, he will avoid Sea King John Cotman and the Governor-General of the Rorstad Archipelago, George Negan. He would avoid most of the subordinates he's familiar with, and he'll avoid his family who operates the family estate over there. He will also avoid his mistress who he's most familiar with. That is to say that you wouldn't need to face demigods, or the test of the masses. Here, there will only be 3 people who are familiar with His Excellency. The first is his secretary, Lieutenant Colonel Wan. He belongs to MI9, and he's in charge of monitoring His Excellency. He likely uses many names, and I'm not sure which is his real name. The second person will be the local mistress His Excellency has here, a beautiful lady by the name of Cynthia. It's said that her ancestor was a noble before his title was stripped, and his family was exiled here. The third person is Oravi's Governor-General, Aston Revolt, the youngest brother of His Excellency. Earl Revolt from the House of Lords is their elder brother. It really doesn't sound too difficult. Besides, my divination results tell me that it's not too dangerous. Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding gently. I need the detailed information regarding Emerius Revolt. We've already prepared everything. This is his photograph. These are the descriptions of any unique traits hidden on his body. These are the unique points of his accent. These are the common words he uses. These are the different reactions and attitudes he has towards different matters. Here is the detailed information regarding his interactions with Luan, Cynthia, and Aston. Bilt was delighted as he produced all the information he received from Admiral Emerius Revolt. Klein first took the photograph and saw a middle-aged gentleman with black hair and blue eyes. He had a strict and old-fashioned demeanor, and his hair was a lot more voluminous than most lone men. He nodded indiscernibly before looking up. I know this is a lot of information, but I believe that you can memorize them all in 2 days. You have to be very professional in such matters. Before Bilt finished his sentence, he subconsciously took a step back because the person before him wasn't Gehrman Sparrow but Emerius Revolt. The strict and arrogant vibes he exuded was no different from the actual person. Holy Lord of Storms, this is almost a miracle. Bilt looked him up and down, and he couldn't help but be amazed. However, you can be another 3 centimeters taller. Your legs can be thicker. But it's fine, there's no rush. His Excellency will arrive the day after tomorrow with the Imperial Navy's 1st Central Sonia Fleet. He would inspect the Oravi Naval Base in the morning and attend a banquet held at the Governor-General's office. I have an invitation to it, and I can bring you there. You can watch from His Excellency's actions and the way he interacts with different people from the side. As he spoke, he received the 500 pounds that Sothoth had taken out from the safe. He handed it to Klein and said, I hope for a pleasant partnership. Klein weighed the notes in his hand and studied it with a few glances before saying, I hope for a pleasant partnership. Backlund, William Street. As an inconspicuous member of the Red Gloves, Leonard Mitchell leaned on the outer wall of a house, awaiting the preliminary investigation work to end. He had his right leg raised slightly, with only his toes to the ground. It made him look desultory. After a while, he saw his teammate return with a somewhat complex expression. He was excited, puzzled, expectant, and nervous. Thompson, is there a conclusion? Leonard's heart stirred as he leaned over with a smile. Yeah, Thompson nodded and answered frankly. Both sides have spoken the truth. They have no way of lying in their dreams. Thompson, with his thin hair, wore his top hat once again. Their descriptions are uniform. Beneath this street is a ruin belonging to the 4th epoch's Tudor dynasty. The entrance is indeed that abandoned chapel. No one knows if there's another entrance for now. Is that so? Leonard didn't delve into the details as he exchanged a few words before moving to the sidelines. Once again, he leaned against the wall. He looked around and suppressed his voice. Old man, this is what you're good at. There's a Tudor family ruin hidden here. An elderly voice rang out in his mind. You're becoming more and more impolite. In our era, disrespect to high-ranking people implies being made into living sacrifices. Also, it's impossible for there to only be one Tudor family ruin in Backlund. Are they lying? Leonard asked softly. The elderly voice chuckled and said, No, they just don't know enough. If my theories are correct, this ruin likely belongs to the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. What? Leonard was stunned. This was an ancient dynasty he had never heard of before. The slightly aged voice chuckled. What an unknowledgeable kid. After the Solomon Empire was first destroyed, it was replaced by the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. Its double consul ruled all of the northern continent. Double consul, Leonard ruminated over this phrase. The slightly aged voice chuckled and sighed. In the ruins underground, there should be 41 inverted candlesticks on the left and 40 on the right. Two of them look like they belong to the throne of a giant, and... Ha. It might be where Alista Tudor became Blood Emperor. Leonard frowned slightly before easing them. He said with a relaxed smile, there must be quite a lot of secrets hidden in there. Of course, but you aren't qualified to know it. The slightly aged voice said. Leonard curled his lips indiscernibly and said, what follows next is the exploration of the ruins. The slightly aged voice chuckled before falling silent. A minute later, Leonard saw Archbishop St. Anthony and the Church of Steam's Archbishop Horimic end their conversation as they returned to their own camps. Immediately following that, Horimic ordered all Machinery Hive Mind personnel to leave, leaving the area to the Church of the Evernight Goddesses Nighthawks. What happened? Upon seeing this scene, Leonard was filled with puzzlement. At that moment, all the Nighthawks heard Archbishop St. Anthony's voice. All Red Gloves gather. The other Nighthawks are to leave the mirror world. Find a reason to evacuate all the residents in the area, and promise them compensation for their property. After all the residents evacuate, the Red Gloves and I will destroy this ruin that stems from an evil era. Entry is forbidden. It will be directly destroyed. May the goddess bless us all. This. Leonard never expected such a development. 7:30 in the evening, at the Orevie Governor-General's office. Klein changed into Sothatha's appearance. He wore a black tailcoat and a bow tie of the same color. He followed Bilt into the banquets hall. The temperature inside was like that of spring. A gigantic chandelier hung from the ceiling, and the shimmering candlelight illuminated the grounds like it was daytime. In the corner on the right, there were musicians dressed in vests and bow ties playing a brisk tune. On the left were long tables. On top were roasted chicken, pan-fried foie gras, stewed lamb, Backlund-styled roasted goose, Odora lobsters with butter and cheese, and other delicacies. Despite the distance, Klein could still catch a whiff of the fragrance wafting over. He planned on getting a plate and filling it with food. At this moment, Bilt tugged at his collar in a reserved manner. He leaned his head over and suppressed his voice. Remember the etiquette as required by such banquets. Our current goal is to observe His Excellency's actions, so just taking a cup of wine would do. There's Misty champagne here, Ormer grape wine, and Southville red wine, all famous alcohols that are seldom seen outside. You can drink some, but not a lot. We have to maintain sufficient sobriety. Yes, try to just go through the motions when drinking. Klein retracted his gaze and nodded. The two of them took a cup of golden champagne, whose minute bubbles were like mist, from a red-vested waiter who passed by them. Then, they moved towards the banquet's highlight, where Amirius Revolt stood wearing his dark blue Navy Admiral's uniform. With their standing, they naturally had no way of approaching the Admiral. All they could do was observe his every action from a slight distance. Amirius's figure is normal. It doesn't look that fit. The corners of his mouth droops a little, indicating his actual age. He doesn't have a beard. His blue eyes seem to hide an authority that one cannot reject or defend against. His dark blue admiral uniform is starched well. There's a red lanyard at his shoulder, which joins to his chest where there are all sorts of medals. His sleeves have golden cuff links, accentuating his epaulets of the same color. His epaulets are split into 3 parts. From inside out, there's an embedded crown with rubies, the crossed scepter and sword, 4 stars made of diamonds. Klein began scrutinizing and used his faceless powers to memorize all the detailed characteristics of the Navy Admiral, as well as the attitude he used when talking to different people. During this process, he only took a sip of the misty champagne and didn't take note of its taste. After he had mostly gathered all the information, Klein exhaled and allowed his mind to rest. The great drain on his mind made him hungry. Hence, he placed the wine cup on the tray of a red-vested waiter, and he planned to get some food from the long table. At this moment, Bilt leaned over and said, "His Excellency has given me the signal. We will be meeting him at an agreed location." Klein retracted his gaze from the roasted chicken and swept a cold glance at Bilt. Bilt shuddered as he hurriedly turned around, leading Gehrman Sparrow from the floor-to-ceiling window and into the garden. After walking for nearly a minute in the secluded path, he paused and pointed at Klein's face. "You can change into His Excellency's appearance. Just pretend that you're that tramp who looks like him." Klein nodded gently and extended his palm to wipe his face. He did so to conceal the disgusting tendrils and granules that might appear on his face while changing his appearance. By the time he lowered his palm, Bilt saw a middle-aged gentleman who looked somewhat like Amirius Revolt. "Very good." Bilt took a few steps forward and came to the entrance of a sundry's room. He extended his hand and pushed open the unlocked door. Amirius Revolt was still wearing the eye-catching admiral's uniform. His body was standing sideways to the door as he observed the garden outside by the window. At this moment, he turned his head and cast his gaze onto the person who resembled him. The indescribable pressure and might made Klein involuntarily lower his head. Amirius Revolt's gaze didn't stop there as it slowly moved to Bilt. He said, without any tinge of emotion, "This isn't the tramp you mentioned before. He's a beyonder." Chapter 622, Temporary Contract. Upon hearing Amirius Revolt's descriptive words which weren't a question, Bilt's forehead instantly broke out into a cold sweat. He turned agape, hoping to explain himself, but finally, he plopped to his knees and said under the indescribable pressure, "Admiral, Your Excellency, the tramp from before suddenly died of an illness. I had no choice but to find an adventurer who can shapeshift." At this moment in time, Klein wasn't too nervous. This was because Amirius Revolt had already noticed him during the banquet. There was no reason for him to only recognize him as a beyonder only now. For him to agree to their meeting and not directly avoid the risk meant that he didn't mind who Bilt had hired. Not worried at all. This is the confidence of a demigod, otherwise, his beyonder pathway is able to avert disaster ahead of time. Klein raised his head with great difficulty as he cast his gaze towards the Navy Admiral beside him. "Quite strong," Amirius Revolt commented without an expression. He continued looking at the genuflecting Bilt and said, "Do not try to use your under-the-table smarts in front of me. An ordinary person and a beyonder in this world are different, and I'm a follower of order, making me be able to be certain of this. Of course, it's identical to what's written in the information. This admiral is inclined to expounding on certain things. I have to remember this point. This is a completely different style from me and Gehrman Sparrow." Klein retracted his gaze in thought as he cast it to the ground as if he was unable to withstand the pressure. Amirius Revolt took one step forward. "Lying is the first mistake you committed. Not being cautious is the second. A tramp you spent a great deal of effort on to groom had suddenly died, and all of a sudden, an adventurer who can shapeshift appears in front of you. Don't you find it a coincidence?" "Yes, it's quite coincidental." Klein nearly said the same thing. If not for his confirmation above the gray fog, he would have suspected if he was being set up by a legendary creature or a Grade 0 sealed artifact. Bilt's pupils constricted as he snapped to his senses. He discovered that due to his horror and fear, all he thought about was to grasp at the final life-saving straw. He had lost the caution brought about from his experience, having not considered whether Gehrman Sparrow's appearance was a coincidence or not. The tramp had suddenly died on the day he arrived at the Sweet Lemon Bar. The more Bilt thought about it, the more he felt as though he had fallen for some intricately planned trap. As Amirius Revolt watched Bilt's expression change with enlightenment and regret, he nodded gently and said, "My father, the deceased Earl Revolt, once taught me this. He said to pardon the first mistake of a subordinate. Bilt, you should be thankful for his benevolence." Bilt's tense mood eased instantly as he felt extremely moved. He thought Amirius Revolt, who was closer to a god than man, would execute him on the spot, so as to warn all the adventurers who were under him. Who knew that he would choose to pardon him? "Your Excellency, Bilt was momentarily unable to form a sentence. Amirius maintained his stern expression and said in a deep voice, "There's a second half of the saying, that is, punish them for their second mistake." "Bilt, do you know what you should do in the future?" The genuflecting Bilt immediately straightened his back and pressed his right fist to his left chest. "I'll be utmost loyal to you, Your Excellency." Amirius nodded and turned to Klein. "What's your name?" "That depends on which identity you're asking about." Klein lampooned inwardly and calmly replied, "Gehrman Sparrow." Amirius Revolt suddenly fell silent for 2 seconds as the atmosphere in the sundry room seemed to freeze. Just as Klein couldn't help but feel uneasy, Amirius finally said, "So it's you." "Your Excellency, you sound as though you know me." "I'm just an ordinary military informant. I only exchanged some bounty through you. I haven't even made any reimbursement claims." Klein silently mumbled as he felt less and less confident. Amirius nodded and said to Bilt and Klein, "The plan will proceed as per normal. However, we need to sign a contract." "A contract?" Klein resisted the pressure with great difficulty as he raised his head to look at Amirius. Amirius didn't provide a further explanation. He lifted up the paper and pen he had long prepared from the window sill and wrote something on it. Every time he made contact with his pen, a golden glow would emit. The solemnity and holiness made it seem like he was penning a law. Klein narrowed his eyes slowly as his vision turned blurry. He couldn't help but lower his head again. After an unknown period of time, Amirius stopped writing and picked up a piece of paper. He said to Klein, "Sign your name at the end. If the conditions aren't satisfactory, you can choose not to sign." "Do you think I have or lack the guts to sign it?" Klein lampooned as he watched Bilt stand up. He received the pen and paper and handed it to Klein. The conditions on the piece of paper were few and simple. Most of them restricted Gehrman Sparrow's actions when acting as Amirius Revolt. It included, but wasn't limited to, voluntarily exposing any problems, not using his identity to engage in acts which were adversarial to Amirius, as well as not make any intimate contact with Miss Cynthia, etc. I thought such important figures wouldn't care about the chastity of their mistresses. This admiral is indeed an old-fashioned man. However, I'm not such a person either. Klein hid his curiosity and asked as though it was an academic question, "What if Miss Cynthia chooses to make intimate contact with me?" In between the lines, he was saying that being too distant or resistant made it easier for Cynthia to notice a problem. He was asking how he should balance the act. "It's fine," Amirius said without any expression. "During the contract's validity, you will not have any desire or lack the ability to do it when facing her. You can do that. This contract is rather powerful. Apart from a contract with spirit world creatures, this is the first time I'm seeing other contracts. Furthermore, the former used the power of the underworld. This contract is only between 2 parties. Is this a demigod beyonder power of Admiral Amirius? The Arbiter Pathway." Klein shot a glance at the dates and discovered that it lasted 5 days. Is he confident that he will return within 5 days, or is his level only capable of implementing a contract for 5 days? Klein read the conditions once again before taking the fountain pen and wrote the name, Gehrman Sparrow. With the final character written, he saw the words on the piece of paper emit a golden glow as they condensed into a resplendent luster. Amidst the resplendent luster, the piece of paper rapidly dissipated and vanished, as though it had fused with the world's rules. An invisible and faint gray fog gently rippled around him as Klein clearly sensed layers of indescribable restrictions placed on him. These restrictions quickly melted into his body, temporarily becoming one with his spirit body and physical flesh. The gray fog can block out bad and good luck from external sources to a certain extent, but it's unable to screen a contract I signed. That's right. If it can screen it, the contract with the messenger wouldn't have been valid. Klein gazed at Amirius Revolt once again in enlightenment. The admiral had already converged his might as he produced a dark gold charm in his palm. On it were the symbols and magical labels representing the Sword of Judgment. Its entire body was converged and somber, giving one the feeling that it was part of a codex. This is a high-level charm using my blood, a 4th epoch ancient codex, and the royal family's grade 0 sealed artifact, Amirius said calmly. Its name is 9th Law. When it's injected with minute amounts of spirituality, it can produce a might that's similar to mine. This can be done even by ordinary people. Without it, you'll find it very difficult to pretend to be me. Indeed, the might I show in a disguised state is only superficial. It's fine fooling others usually, but once there's a need to shock and awe any subordinate, that would be useless. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Amirius continued, with your present strength, you should be able to withstand its usage. Through it, you can indicate a necessary restriction on the target, making them be in an extremely disadvantageous state. This way, even if a demigod were to sound you out, you'll be able to scare him away. Chapter 623, First night. As he touched the 9th Law charm in his pocket, Klein adjusted his height and details regarding his appearance, making him look identical to Amirius Revolt. He walked out from the sundry room by using another door and walked down a silent corridor, back into the Governor-General's office. On the way, waiters and maidservants would occasionally pass by him, but no one dared to look straight at him. Just catching sight of his admiral uniform would have them scurrying to the sides as they bowed with their heads lowered. Any person of the same height could probably find his way into the banquet hall when donning these clothes. I have to say, acting as an important figure can be easier than acting like an ordinary person. Klein continued looking straight as he maintained his somber attitude. He walked towards a path paved with black brick in an unhurried fashion. He soon heard beautiful and melodic music as elegant wall lamps were burning with gas, illuminating the dark environment. Just as Klein approached a break room, he saw a room open. A middle-aged man had been waiting there as he walked over. The man had black hair and blue eyes. His facial features somewhat resemble Amirius, but his forehead was higher and his eye bags were puffy. The corners of his mouth didn't droop. He was none other than Amirius Revolt's youngest brother, Aston Revolt. This gentleman had once served in the navy, and he had been promoted to colonel after rendering meritorious services in the southern continent's colonies. Later, he got sick of his military career, and together with political balance, he agreed to a switch in career and became the Governor-General. In the 5 to 6 years he was in Orevie, due to the importance placed on the island's location and resources, he pushed for the Revolt family to mass-purchase farmland and estates, allowing him to own plenty of property. This wasn't completely obtained through his powers either. Aston and the Revolt family had paid a sufficient price, and they even took loans with the bank. It wasn't like the Balam East Coast where land belonging to the Faisak people were forcefully bought at extremely low prices. Of course, if he wasn't Governor-General, then Orevie and his elder brother wouldn't be the highest commander of the Central Sonia Seas Navy, and the Revolt family wouldn't have so easily convinced their targets to sell such excellent farmland and estates. Here comes the test. Klein calmly approached and stopped in front of Aston Revolt. Aston looked around and asked in a deep voice, "Have you decided on that matter?" "What matter?" Klein first felt blank before he recalled an introduction in the information he received. If Aston requests for a private chat or asks for an answer to a certain matter, tell him that an answer will be given to him when departing from Orevie. Admiral Amirius really anticipated this. I just need to watch my attitude and tone. Yes, I also need to use the unique terms and pronunciations used by lone aristocrats. Klein gently nodded and sternly said, "Wait a few more days. The answer will be given to you when departing from Orevie." Aston didn't raise any doubts as he chuckled. "You seem to be waiting for something to give you the strength to decide. That matter that Admiral Amirius has to do himself." Klein's heart stirred as he familiarly used the tone of high-level personnel. "Keep your conjectures to yourself." With that said, he took a step forward and walked towards the banquet hall. Aston Revolt focused on his elder brother's back, his expression gradually turning cold. He then shook his head slightly. After entering the banquet hall, Klein surveyed the area and walked towards the long table with food on it. From time to time, he would stop to exchange pleasantries with people who came near him. During this process, he realized that he didn't need to understand the topics raised in any conversation. All he needed to do was nod occasionally, allowing the conversation to harmoniously progress until its end. Indeed, the status of an important figure makes certain aspects of acting easy, but correspondingly, there are certain matters that can be difficult. Klein tore through one obstacle after another before finally arriving at the long table. He casually picked up a plate and told himself that Admiral Emerius liked fish, beef, and lobster, while disliking chicken and goose. Therefore, he avoided food like the roasted chicken and Backlund-styled roasted goose. He picked up some beef, fried dragonbone fish, and Odora lobster with butter and cheese. As the metallic containers had their bottoms lined with asbestos, with red-hot charcoal burning under it or steaming hot water, all of the food maintained an appropriate temperature. Klein nearly broke down, destroying his persona when he took the first bite. He tried his best to maintain Admiral Emerius's image as he held his plate and chatted with the port city's member of parliament, navy suppliers, etc. He seriously listened to what they had to say, stuffing food into his mouth from time to time. He noticed that a young man in a tailcoat kept following behind him. He had neat, blonde hair that he combed backward. He had a receding hairline with light blue eyes. He looked handsome and gentlemanly. Identical to the picture. Emerius's secretary, Uwan. Klein controlled himself and didn't size him up. He wanted to fill his stomach before the end of the banquet. Once out of the Governor-General's office, Klein boarded the carriage which was guarded by bodyguards. He sat beside the wine cabinet. The blonde secretary, Uwan, followed him in. As his leather boots stepped onto the thick, soft carpet, he silently inched towards a spot opposite Klein. He sat there, but he only occupied a third of the seat. The carriage began moving as Uwan took out a stack of documents from the black briefcase he carried. Your Excellency, this is the Orevy Naval Base's ledger for the year 1349. Klein extended his hand over and casually browsed through a few pages. What? £1 for a roll of toilet paper. The naval base's bathroom was renovated 20 times a year. Klein did some simple math and discovered all sorts of ridiculous line items. Isn't accounting such as this way too simple and obvious? I can even give them classes and specially teach them how to make claims. Klein seriously considered the attitude he should show. From his point of view, the greatest difficulty in disguising as Emerius was to fool Uwan. This wasn't to say that Governor-General Aston and Miss Cynthia weren't as familiar with Admiral Emerius as his secretary. It was just that, as his younger brother, Aston might help his brother conceal the matter if he discovered something amiss after being given a hint. Similarly, as his mistress, Cynthia would be inclined to help conceal the matter for the Admiral as his dependent. Of course, the possibility that Cynthia was a spy couldn't be eliminated. There was still the matter of there being a chance of being used by a spy, but nothing could be as dangerous as Uwan, whose duty was to monitor the Admiral. I can't expose any problems. What kind of attitude would Admiral Emerius have when faced with such a report? Go into a rage, or pretend to be in a rage? No, the Orevy Naval Base personnel wouldn't be that daring to hand over a clearly problematic report as though he were blind. They must have a certain level of confidence and a tacit understanding between them. As the information didn't mention this, Klein could only make a judgment based on his experience. Furthermore, he could confirm that either the Orevy Naval Base's report was beyond Admiral Emerius's expectations or was determined to be of little importance. Just based on the schedule, it was something that could easily be dealt with. Regardless of the possibilities, I have to use the attitude that a person of high standing will usually employ. That is to not indicate my stance. Klein closed the documents and handed it back to the blonde secretary, Uwan. He said expressionlessly, "Put it on my desk." In between the lines, this sentence meant, "I'll look through it carefully." To others, it would mean something different based on their standpoints. If the Oravi naval base had done it without warning, this meant that the admiral was somewhat dissatisfied and was awaiting an explanation. If the two had reached a tacit, mutual understanding on the matter, it meant that Admiral Amirius wished to obtain more favorable benefits in the matter. As for whether it would offend anyone, Klein didn't care. After all, he wouldn't be Amirius Revolt in a few days' time. He believed that a true demigod had the means to repress the anger of his subordinates. In addition, he was grateful that Amirius wasn't a demigod of the Church of Storms. Otherwise, he had to consider whether to nod his head and pass the report, or throw the document back in anger while throwing a few people in passing into the sea to feed the fishes. Yes, Your Excellency. The blonde secretary, Uan, didn't change his expression. He stuffed the document back into his black briefcase as though he had long expected such a response. On the way back, Klein leaned into the carriage according to Amirius Revolt's habits. He half-closed his eyes as though he was contemplating certain matters, but in fact, he wasn't thinking of anything. Uan maintained his silence and didn't speak at all. Human-height iron-black street lamps were quickly left behind as the carriage drove close to the naval base before taking a bend into a house with a garden and lawn. Just as Klein walked up the steps, a butler opened the door for him as servants lined the two sides, reverently awaiting his entrance. The living room was decorated in a very classic manner. There were oil paintings of beautiful scenery hung up, limestone statues, simple and elegant vases, etc. A faint but lingering fragrance emanated in the room, one that reached into the heart. Klein, who should have relaxed, ended up tensing up as he saw a beautiful lady walk towards him in a home gown. She looked to be in her early 20s. Her blonde hair cascaded down, and when she cast her blue eyes over, it was as though there was a glow hidden within them. While filled with gentle feminineness, there were still some remnants of her youth. She was none other than Admiral Amirius's mistress, Cynthia. Klein held back his discomfort and allowed Amirius's stern face to reveal a smile as he widened his arms. Cynthia threw herself into his arms and tiptoed. With her cheeks by his cheek, she whispered with a smile, "Admiral, I've already heated the water for you in the bathtub." This means she had someone monitor the end of the banquet. Being a mistress isn't something simple either. Admiral Amirius does like to take hot baths so as to relax his thoughts. In order to ignore how close their cheeks were, Klein allowed his thoughts to wander. As a straight man, he should have felt embarrassed while also being rather glad to be approached by such a beautiful member of the opposite sex. However, the temporary contract made him have zero urges. Hence, all that was left was awkwardness. Very good, Klein praised her as he gently pushed Cynthia away, having had nowhere to place them. Knowing that the Admiral didn't like to be intimate in front of the servants, Cynthia retreated and led Klein to the second floor. He was brought into the bathroom as he prepared a bathrobe for him. After doing all of this, Cynthia instructed the servants not to come to the second floor unless they heard the bell ring. Then, she returned to the bedroom, took off all her clothes and changed into a nightgown made of silk. Chapter 624, Warning: the bathroom was partitioned inside. The emanating steam covered the entire bathtub. Apart from his head, Klein's entire body was soaked in the hot water. He lay there in such great comfort that he didn't even wish to move his toes. What a beautiful night. If only there was no Cynthia outside. I still have to deal with her later. Klein sighed as he considered what excuse to use to avoid being intimate with her. In accordance with Admiral Amirius Revolt's traits, he decided to first use work as an excuse. After that would be the excuse of him not feeling well, him losing the ability to have sex, him needing some time to digest any medicine he had just taken, and how he had suddenly realized his true sexual orientation, making him find curly-haired baboons extremely attractive. As for whether this would damage the Admiral's image, Klein didn't feel the slightest bit of pressure. As long as he prevented Cynthia from suspecting that he was a fake Amirius Revolt, he would have perfectly completed his mission. The subsequent explanations for those excuses and how he finds an excuse to explain his recovery would all be Admiral Amirius's problem. "What has that got to do with me?" Gairman Sparrow. And what has Gairman Sparrow's ruined reputation have to do with me, Sherlock Moriarty? Klein stood up in satisfaction as he walked out to the dry partition while dropping wet. He got a bath towel and dried himself. After changing into a hanging bathrobe, Klein inhaled silently as though he had unlocked a major enemy in his quest. He opened the door to the bathroom. Seeing the corridor empty, with only the light from the wall lamps on both sides illuminating the darkness, Klein felt slightly relieved and was no longer as tensed. This is almost the same feeling as challenging a pirate admiral. As he mumbled, he realized a serious problem. He had no idea which of the rooms was the master bedroom or study. Regardless, I have to inform Cynthia, otherwise, it would make Admiral Emerius appear strange. Klein recalled the layout of similar houses in an attempt to accurately find the master bedroom. At this moment, the door to the room diagonally across him creaked open. Cynthia, who was draped in a silk nightgown, walked over. Her blonde hair appeared wet and messy as they cascaded down. There were even a few strands of hair fluttering in front of her blue eyes and bright red lips. It hid the glow in her eyes as her lips were somewhat closed. She appeared extremely alluring under the dim environment. The neckline of the silk nightgown was very open, as snow-whiteness and a deep cleavage was reflected in Klein's eyes. Klein nearly raised his head to look at the ceiling to avoid the intense stimulation. Calm down, calm down. You are Emerius Revolt. Besides, you've seen a half-naked demoness before. Compared to an ailment maiden, this lady's charms are clearly insufficient. Wait, why am I thinking about demonesses? Who knows if they were formerly men or women? Klein maintained his gaze as he sized her up and down with a teasing tone. In that instant, he could sense that primal desire, but there was no response from his nether regions. This is the result of the temporary contract. In fact, Admiral Emerius didn't need to go through the trouble. Even if I have the urge, I'll be able to control myself. What kind of situation haven't I encountered before? Yes. Cynthia is a little different from what the records say. Isn't it said that she became Emerius's mistress about 1 to 2 years ago? With them not being able to meet each other most of the time, the Admiral has to coax her each time as she hadn't had her pent-up desires fulfilled? Why is she the one taking the initiative today? Does she find her standing as his mistress unstable, or has she been switched? Ever since Klein became a faceless, he felt that everyone was a fake. Cynthia's eyelids were lowered. The courage she had mustered disappeared bit by bit under Emerius's scrutiny. Her face was tainted with a horrified blush. She was embarrassed but also felt some pride. Then, she heard him calmly instruct, "Help me prepare some coffee and place it in my study. I have many things to deal with tonight. You don't have to wait for me." Cynthia raised her head suddenly, her embarrassed blushing still present. She had momentarily failed to understand what Admiral Emerius had said. Klein secretly inhaled and went forward to hug her before kissing her gently on the forehead. "I'll spend lots of time with you in a few days." Such a response came from the provided information, but he had slightly changed the terms. To be frank, if not for him having some prior understanding, Klein would have definitely believed that Admiral Emerius would wear the same stoic face while spending time with his mistress, even when having sex. He looked stern in whatever he said and did. However, this demigod also had his gentle side when it came to his speech. He was just not that great at saying lovey-dovey words. This also made him understand something else. Many people could only be viewed from the surface, and it was impossible to imagine what they were like in private. For a faceless to pull off a true disguise, they had to do meticulous investigations and have ample comprehension of the target. This was just like how a magician never performed unprepared. Cynthia revealed a clear look of disappointment, but she quickly restrained those feelings as she smiled. "All right. Admiral, your nightgown is in the room. A bathrobe isn't suitable for handling matters. This is identical to the information. She's rather considerate and knows how to be understanding." Klein watched as Cynthia turned and entered the room. She pulled at the bell. As for him, he took this opportunity to take off his bathrobe and change into a dark red nightgown with trousers of the same color. Cynthia attentively opened the door to the study and tidied up the slightly messy desk. Later, she waited for the maidservant to finish making the coffee before personally taking it and delivering it by hand. During this process, Klein read the documents and information, acting as though he looked extremely professional. But in fact, he had little idea about the data and designs plans of ironclad warships and sail battleships. He was no different from an illiterate. In this domain, all he knew were carriers, air domination, the main cannon guns, and turrets. When he saw Cynthia silently leave and close the door behind her from the corner of his eye, Klein relaxed completely. He knew that he had finally survived the night. Inside the master bedroom, Cynthia pursed her lips as she took out the necklace under her pillow and tightly clasped the item resembling a black rhinoceros horn which was the length of a finger segment. She stood there and silently prayed, "O great mother tree of desire, please, make me more alluring, allowing Admiral Amirius to be even more mesmerized by me, so that he can gain extreme pleasure from me and bear me a child." Inside the quiet study, Klein flipped through the pile of documents placed in front of him. He followed the handling methods according to what the information indicated. He chose the simple ones and signed Amirius Revolt's name on them. The reason why he could mimic his signature was because Faceless allowed him to remember a target's unique traits, while Clown gave him the precise control needed. The complicated ones he couldn't understand had notes written with the following vibe: "Continue studying the matter." After busying himself until midnight, Klein reached out to cover his mouth and yawned slightly. "This won't do. I need to sleep. I have plenty of challenges tomorrow. I have to maintain sufficient strength and energy." Klein thought for a moment and gave up the idea of returning to the master bedroom. He raised his right hand and pressed down on his half-closed eyes. He pulled them down and moved his eyes to his nose bridge. Following that, Klein opened up two slits where Klein's eyes originally were and used his flesh to produce a pair of fake eyes. "After becoming a Faceless, I'm really beginning to resemble a monster. If only I had such a godly technique back in school." He sighed silently. He half-leaned his body as he kept his real eyes closed while his fake eyes were left open to read the documents. His specialty as a clown allowed him to maintain his balance. He remained motionless like a stone statue. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly awoke from his dream. He sensed that there was a force attempting to pull him into a deep slumber before infiltrating him. "Who is it? I didn't do anything recently. Why would anyone enter my dream? That's not right. I'm now Admiral Amirius Revolt." Klein's heart stirred as he immediately changed his looks. Even in his dreams, he appeared to be that demigod. Meanwhile, he felt his consciousness tightly contract as though it was avoiding something. This is different from an ordinary dream infiltration. I've clearly regained my lucidity, and I can escape by myself and wake up, but I'm unable to leave this dreamscape. Klein found plenty of oddities as he tried a few attempts. He knew very well that he was sleeping, and he could sense and control his body outside the dream, but no matter what he did, he was unable to wake up. Right on the heels of that, he saw a blurry white gas form an indiscernible figure. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly as he tore through the dream with his psyche, allowing his real body to move silently. Then, he put his palm into his pocket to touch the 9th law charm. At that moment, the blurry figure calmly said, "Do not participate in the matter regarding Aston. This is a warning." Quite impressive to warn a demigod. What is Aston and the others thinking of doing? Klein thought for a moment and emanated his spirituality, allowing the 9th law charm to produce a deep sense of dominance. Then, he imitated it and produced the same feeling in his dream. He said with a deep voice, "Who are you? Who do you represent?" The blurry figure was taken aback before he said with a laughing sigh, as expected of Law Weaver Amirius. "You actually managed to maintain your lucidity in such a situation." No. Although Amirius has a title of law weaver, he's not adept in such matters. You should say, as expected of Lord Fool. Klein lampooned and sternly said, answer my question. The blurry figure chuckled. You don't need to know who I am. As a demigod, you should be clear that everything is fated, likewise for the times. Do not resist the fate of an era, which is also the trend of the times. This will only make you a sacrifice of history. Fate of an era, the trend of the times, sacrifice of history. When he heard this, Klein suddenly thought of a term, Twilight Hermit Order. However, Klein didn't say a word, nor did he say those words. This was because Admiral Amirius would be him for the next few days. Seeing Law Weaver Amirius fall into silence, the blurry figure didn't say another word. It turned into a emanating white gas before vanishing from the dream. Chapter 625, Successful First Day Few. What exactly are Amirius and Aston Revolt scheming about? To attract a warning from the Twilight Hermit Order. Unless it can truly change the times and influence the direction of history, this ancient and secretive organization wouldn't even show itself or reveal its identity. Klein stood by the side of a magnificent castle in his dream, thoughtfully watching the spot where the blurry figure had disappeared from. Amidst his thoughts, he suddenly snapped awake and was no longer as certain about his theory. The ploy which Admiral Amirius and his brother are planning might not really influence the trends of the times. Although the Twilight Hermit Order only involves itself in important matters, as a leader of another secret organization, Klein clearly knew that apart from carrying out the organization's own mission and values, it also provided help among members. From Emperor Rosel's diary, I can tell that the Twilight Hermit Order has members from different domains, standings, and sequences. Apart from a number of them fervently believing in the original creator as they await the coming of twilight and the awakening of the true God, the rest are only seeking to benefit themselves. Under such circumstances, as long as the organizer doesn't strictly implement order, there would naturally be missions entrusted between one another. Perhaps, the matter Aston Revolt is planning affects a particular member of the Twilight Hermit Order who was made aware of it ahead of time. He entrusted the matter to another member and used the excuse of the trend of the times to warn Amirius Revolt. Working from this logic, the concealed matter is rather interesting. With the level of the Twilight Hermit Order, Law Weaver Amirius, who's likely only a sequence 4, isn't too difficult a target to eliminate. I even suspect that they can mobilize up to 3 or more angels in a manner that's far superior to the 7 churches. Then, why didn't they take action directly and instead gave an advanced warning? Back in Backlund, if an angel were to appear, who knows if some true god would descend upon the land. Therefore, the Twilight Hermit Order had no choice but to use a more roundabout and discreet method to deal with Duke Negan. But this is the Oravi Island. Even high-sequence Beyonders aren't stationed here. The warning is because the Twilight Hermit Order advocates secrecy and doesn't wish to expose itself, so they're trying not to use overly intense methods, or is it the case that the member who assigned the mission doesn't wish to see Amirius killed? To him, this admiral is still of use, so he's unwilling to give up on him, even if Amirius might be involved in something disadvantageous towards him. Then, his true identity seems to be confined to certain circles. Klein made a bold assumption, but with no way of verifying it, he could only temporarily put the matter aside and throw it to the back of his mind. It has nothing to do with me since it's the Twilight Hermit Order who's warning Admiral Amirius. As long as I don't involve myself with anything for the next few days, I should be able to last until the mission is completed. Everything else that develops afterward has nothing to do with me. With my present status, I'm still far from investigating the Twilight Hermit Order. I don't even have the right to probe deeper. Klein kept to his beliefs and turned his sights to his tarot club. I just discovered a problem. Other secret organizations have their own aims and values at their core while mixing in the aid that members provide each other. As for our tarot club, it's more impressive. There are only missions given to each other, without any aims or values. No, there are aims and values among some of the members. For example, my dear Moon believes that this is an organization born to save the world. The fool Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh before exiting the dreamscape. He rubbed away the fake eyes and moved his real eyes back to their original position in a very fluid motion when he suddenly paused. That wasn't a simple dream infiltration. Klein frowned slightly as he recalled what had happened. That was because the power had first attempted to pull him into a deep slumber. Back then, I had already fallen asleep, so why would he do so? Captain once said that a nightmare can directly see a dream, so it's impossible to commit such a mistake. Therefore, the visitor hadn't used the beyonder powers of a nightmare, but something else. He located me via the spirit world? Or after he knew my location, he used the sea of collective subconscious, as described by Ma'am Daly, to directly influence my beyonder powers? Yes. I'm more inclined to the second reason. That's the only thing that can explain why I couldn't escape my dream despite having regained lucidity. It's recorded in Emperor Rosel's diary that during his participation in the suspected Twilight Hermit Order, his entry into the gathering was based on a realistic dreamscape that encompassed the entire continent. A realistic dreamscape. Klein nodded and chuckled silently with a sigh. Admiral Emirius definitely didn't expect the Twilight Hermit Order's warning. It's only because he hired me. If it were anyone else, the stand-in would have already been exposed. That ninth law charm was well worth it. City of Silver, inside the spire, in the room belonging to Chief Colin Iliad. Derek Berg, who had been summoned, saw the grizzled, scarred demon hunter once again as he felt uneasy. After he finished his greetings, Colin sized him up and asked, "You've advanced?" "Yes, I'm already a Sequence 7 Solar High Priest." Later on, he even drew intersecting lines and began playing 5 in a row with himself, a game created by Emperor Rosel. Of course, his rich experience and his conscientiousness of his identity made him raise his head from time to time to give the reporter a stern look in the eye while giving a nod of encouragement. As for what the person had said, he didn't pay any attention to it. All he did was occasionally remember a few words. During the briefing, Klein shot a glance at the blonde secretary, Juan, to get him to represent himself to mention a few points that needed clarification. Everything followed the schedule. Towards the end, Klein flipped the black-bound notebook a few pages forward and used the accent of a lone aristocrat to recite the report which the secretary had drafted and the admiral had edited. Then, according to the actual situation, he used the common terms Emirius would use and added a few conjunctions and pet phrases, such as, "There are a few points," and, "Let me continue on a few more points." It was already evening by the time the briefing ended. Under Juan's companionship, Klein left the Oravi naval base and headed for the residence of a naval supplier where a banquet was held. At the banquet, they casually chatted about the price fluctuations of port goods. As for Klein, he mimicked Admiral Emirius, and he would mention a dated joke from Backlund from time to time, garnering a warm response from everyone as he was praised for his humor. After successfully acting until the banquet ended, Klein boarded the carriage, feeling exhausted in body and mind. "I have to take note of my speech and actions every minute and second. Engaging in true acting for a day is more tiring than battling a pirate admiral." Klein silently sighed, as he closed his eyes halfway without a change in expression. He knew that the most difficult stage of the day wasn't over. He still had to deal with Cynthia. Inside the villa, Cynthia learned from the attendant who had gone out to make inquiries that Admiral Emirius was about to return. She quietly returned to her bedroom, took out the tiny black rhinoceros horn pendant, and used a metallic plate to scratch off tiny bits of powder, mixing it into the hot water inside a white porcelain teacup. After repeating the honorific name of the Mother Tree of Desire 7 times, she waited nearly a minute before lifting the teacup in hope, cleanly downing it. Chapter 626, Emirius's decision. Looking at the lights emanating out from the villa in the darkness, Klein spent several seconds mentally preparing himself before alighting the carriage. He followed the 3-layered staircase and came to the door, where the Admiral's bodyguards and servants were lined up at the sides, before stepping in. Seeing Cynthia wearing conservative home clothes due to the existence of others, Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief as he maintained his stoic expression and slowly walked over. Cynthia's smile became more and more brilliant as she shifted the strands of her hair to the back of her ear, revealing her fair and slender neck. Her neckline didn't have any marks left behind by a necklace. Seeing Secretary Yuan and the Admiral's bodyguards head for their own rooms or moving outside the building to take up their patrolling positions, Klein pulled Cynthia into an embrace and said in a deep voice, "There's no need to prepare any hot water. Give me a quiet room. I need to spend the night alone." Cynthia used her eyes to express her puzzlement and blankness. Klein surveyed his surroundings and softly said, "Something unexpected happened. I need to enter an extremely quiet state to recover." As he spoke, he raised his right hand to pull at his collar, revealing a patch of faint-colored fleshy granules. His problematic physical condition with an abnormal reaction was an excuse Admiral Amirius had prepared for the tramp stand-in, so as to avoid Cynthia's attempts of intimacy without exposing a problem. To make it more convincing, Klein used his faceless powers to provide evidence. Cynthia turned agape as she nearly screamed. Thankfully, she covered her mouth in time and held it in. The moment Cynthia recovered from her shock, she immediately asked nervously, her concern and emotions evident, "Are you fine? Do you need to see a doctor?" "No, this is the price needed for powerful strength. I'll recover given 2 to 3 days of solitude." Klein had already found the excuse needed for the future. "Oh, okay." Cynthia hurriedly helped Klein up to the second floor and led him into the quietest room. As for the master bedroom, she had already lit some scented candles and scattered some faint-smelling extract, so she didn't offer him some. Seeing the door close, Klein slowly exhaled. He changed out of his admiral's uniform and lied down in satisfaction. Not far away in the master bedroom, the worried and disappointed Cynthia was soaking herself in hot water before sleeping. She looked at the ceiling with an unfocused gaze as she couldn't help but recall the exhortations of her parents from a few days ago. They wanted her to charm Admiral Amirius and hopefully be impregnated with his child. This way, their family would be able to take on more businesses with the Central Sonia Seas Naval Fleet. Admiral seems to have many matters hidden in his heart, so much that something abnormal has happened to his body. Cynthia's thoughts wandered as they slowly dispersed. Without her realizing it, she had fallen asleep. During this period, she found her digestive system turning warm as her body felt a little hot. In her dream, she seemed to see a pitch-black sky which was dotted with resplendent stars. One of them seemed to notice her gaze as it produced a brighter glow. The next morning, the invigorated Klein enjoyed a sumptuous breakfast which was nothing spectacular to speak of. Once again, he was surrounded by the Admiral's bodyguards as he arrived at the Orivy Naval Base and was placed in the most luxurious and spacious office. According to Admiral Amirius's habits, he would spend some alone time every 2 or 3 days to study and master his beyonder powers to a deeper extent and produce more effective techniques. Therefore, Klein spent most of the day without being disturbed, with him only needing to handle some simple work. Inside the quiet and spacious office, Klein leisurely paced about or flipped through books from the bookshelf. From time to time, he would put his palm into his pockets to touch the 9th law charm to release some of its powerful might. This was to make Secretary Yuan, who was outside, believe that there was nothing wrong with Admiral Amirius. After some time, Klein felt sleepy and decided to take a short nap. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. "There's something important." Klein frowned. Something that made Secretary Yuan disturb Admiral Amirius's focus training was definitely nothing simple. "Come in," Klein converged his emotions and answered with a deep voice. The handsome blonde man, Yuan, turned the handle and entered. He held a telegram in his hand. He said with a suppressed voice, "Your Excellency, a telegram from Backlund. Mr. Aston has been relieved of his post as Governor General. He will temporarily be replaced by the City Council's chairman. It's said that the new Governor General will arrive today." Aston Revolt has been relieved of his post as Governor General. Has their secret been discovered? That's right, The Twilight Hermit Order has already warned me, no, Emirius. It means that they had long grasped the actual matter. With another member cranking the wheel, the matter will likely go through a series of position changes, putting an end to the matter. A warning was given the previous night, and action was taken today. They must have prepared for quite a while. Yes, that can be seen from the fact that the new Governor-General will arrive today. Klein was first alarmed before he felt that the matter was within reason. He mimicked the attitude Admiral Emirius would have when faced with a major problem by pacing back and forth before saying with a stern expression, "I'm aware." Klein didn't express his views or pass any orders, appearing extremely staid. However, it was because he hadn't decided on a response. We have a saying from the Footaholic Empire, moving is not as good as staying put. I wonder if Roselle had translated this. Klein lampooned as he gave a self-deprecating jest. Juan raised his head and glanced at Admiral Emirius without saying a word before silently leaving the office. Phew. Klein paced about once again as he considered what Admiral Emirius would do if he were standing here. This was something important that had happened outside of his expectations, therefore, Klein could only infer from Emirius's character, experiences, as well as some of the personal descriptions in the information provided to him. He's a conservative person. Even while he was a mid- and low-sequence beyonder and was on all kinds of different ships, he very rarely took risks. He believes himself to be a lone aristocrat who values family, children, and emotions. He's a gentleman who's of good bearing and garners the affection of women. This point is open to debate. With his standing and status, even a curly-haired baboon would garner the affection of men and women, no, perhaps even more. At the very least, a curly-haired baboon doesn't tell dated jokes. Information ran through Klein's mind as they intertwined to form a multifaceted image of Admiral Emirius. While in his deep thought, he heard knocking at his door once again. "Come in." Klein instantly tensed up. Juan entered and pointed outside. "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston wishes to meet you." "Why is Aston here?" "He came to Emirius to seek his protection." "Or does he plan on making a desperate struggle?" Klein narrowed his eyes slightly, realizing that he couldn't make a decision for Admiral Emirius. What would he do? After receiving a warning from the Twilight Hermit Order, he should already realize that the matter has been exposed. The target was long prepared, so with his conservative nature, it can be imagined that his decision would be. However, he greatly values family. He even provided some of Aston Revolt's interesting tidbits. It's not hard to tell that there's the concern and love for his younger brother in this matter. He doesn't like cannabis and tobacco. Drinking is just for socializing purposes. Apart from being a little caught up with beautiful women, there's nothing seriously wrong with him. He greatly values family. Family. Klein's thoughts raced as he fully immersed himself in Emirius's identity, fully experiencing his hidden feelings for his family and the importance he placed on it. Family. At that instant, he seemed to turn into Emirius, but he was able to analyze the various problems in a detached manner. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Klein heard himself using a somewhat unfamiliar tone, saying, "Tell him that I have many matters to deal with. I don't have the time to meet him. Also, buy him a ticket back to Backlund." One seemed to have expected it as he retracted his gaze and replied, as though everything was normal, "Yes, Your Excellency." As he watched Juan leave the office to find Aston Revolt outside, Klein gently sighed like the real Emirius Revolt. He knew that Emirius would have made the same choice if he had returned early. This was family, something he valued greatly. With their scheme completely exposed, there was no way Emirius would have exhausted his last chip on a bet and place his family at risk of destruction. As long as he didn't participate in it, and as long as he's still a demigod, the Revolt family wouldn't suffer any overly serious damage even if he isn't able to remain as the highest commander of Central Sonia Sea. And to get his secretary to buy his tickets for him made it clear that Emirius still treated Aston as his brother. It was a warning to others not to harm him before they figured out what was happening. After nearly a minute, one returned and said, "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston has left. Emerius greatly values family." Klein fell silent for 2 seconds before asking in a deep voice, his back facing his secretary, "Did he say anything?" One answered truthfully, "He said that you are indeed a cold person by nature." The corners of Klein's lips curled slightly as he produced an unfeeling smile. This was an instinctive reaction, however, with him completely in character as Emerius, he believed that the admiral would have had the same reaction. The feeling and emotions were the same. For the rest of the time, Klein sat in his office and didn't meet anyone, nor did he deal with any official business. All he did was occasionally listen to his secretary report to him about the situation on Orvie Island. Nothing happened until the arrival of the new Governor-General. In the evening, he didn't attend the banquet he was supposed to attend, and he returned to his villa. As he saw Cynthia walk towards him, he hugged her. Then, he calmly said, "Aston has been relieved of his post as Governor-General." All his sighs and pain seemed to be condensed into that seemingly emotionless sentence. "I heard about it. It should be fine, right?" Cynthia asked anxiously. Klein closed his eyes and didn't mention it again. All he did was give soft, terse reply. That sentence was the most obvious expression of his emotions as a stern, old-fashioned, and conservative high-ranking man. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.